The call came in at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had already tested my patience. I'd been a park ranger at Kituwa National Forest for 12 years, and October always brought its share of unprepared hikers who thought the changing leaves meant easier trails. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio as I sat in the ranger station, finishing paperwork from that morning's wildlife count. Unit 7, we've got 2 missing hikers on the Tsalagi Trail. Last check-in was 3 hours ago near mile marker 14. I grabbed my pack, already loaded with standard search and rescue gear. The Tsalagi Trail wound deep into the oldest part of the forest, where cell service was non-existent and the trees grew so thick that noon looked like twilight. Most lost hikers turned up within a few hours, usually embarrassed and dehydrated, with stories about taking a wrong turn at a fork in the path. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes on the winding Forest Service road. My truck bounced over roots and rocks that recent rains had exposed. The autumn air carried that distinctive smell of decomposing leaves and damp earth that always reminded me why I'd chosen this life over a desk job in the city. As I pulled into the small gravel parking area, I spotted their vehicle, a blue sedan with Georgia plates, completely wrong for these roads. I checked my GPS unit and shouldered my pack. The missing hikers were a young couple, according to dispatch. Marcus and Jessica Huang, both 26, from Atlanta. They'd registered at the visitor center that morning, enthusiastic about photographing the fall colors. The volunteer who'd checked them in noted they seemed properly equipped, good boots, plenty of water, downloaded trail maps on their phones. The first few miles passed quickly. I'd walked the Tsalagi Trail hundreds of times, knew every switchback and stream crossing. My boots found their rhythm on the packed earth as I called out periodically, listening for responses between the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. The forest felt different in late afternoon, shadows lengthening between the massive oak and hickory trees that had stood here since before my great-grandfather's time. At mile marker 14, I stopped to examine the area. Boot prints in a muddy section showed 2 sets of tracks heading off trail to the north. I shook my head. Tourists always wanted that perfect photo, never considering how quickly you could lose your bearings once you left the marked path. I followed their tracks, noting broken twigs and disturbed leaf litter. The woods grew denser as I moved away from the trail. Ancient trees towered overhead, their canopy so thick that premature darkness was settling in. I clicked on my headlamp and continued following the tracks, which seemed to wander without purpose. After 30 minutes of bushwhacking, I found their first piece of gear, a blue water bottle lying in a small clearing. Marcus, Jessica. My voice echoed strangely in the enclosed space. The normal forest sounds, birds settling for the night, squirrels chattering, had gone silent. That should have been my first warning. I picked up the water bottle, noting it was still full. Why would they drop it and not retrieve it? The tracks continued, but now they showed signs of running. Longer strides, deeper impressions, leaves scattered wildly. My hand moved instinctively to the radio on my belt. Dispatch, Unit 7, I'm approximately 2 miles north of marker 14 off trail. Found some gear. Tracks indicate the subjects were moving quickly. Static answered me. I tried again, but the mountains blocked the signal. I'd have to continue alone until I reached higher ground. The tracks led to a steep ravine cut by a seasonal stream, now flowing strong from recent rains. I could see where they'd slid down the muddy bank. Long furrows in the earth, a broken sapling. At the bottom I found Marcus's backpack, abandoned among the rocks. The contents were scattered: energy bars, a first aid kit, a camera with a cracked lens. I descended carefully, my light sweeping the ravine. More tracks in the sandy areas beside the stream, but these were confusing. It looked like they'd split up, one set heading upstream, another down. But there were other marks too, larger prints that didn't quite make sense. They looked almost like bare feet, but wrong somehow. Too long, with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. A sound made me freeze, a low moan echoing off the ravine walls. Human, definitely human, but filled with such terror that goosebumps rose on my arms despite my fleece jacket. Hello? Marcus? Jessica? I'm with the Forest Service. I'm here to help. The moaning stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was complete. Not even the sound of water over rocks. My headlamp beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. I made a decision, and headed upstream, toward where I thought the sound had originated. 20 minutes later, I found Jessica. She was huddled in a hollowed-out space beneath a massive fallen tree, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide and unfocused. Her jacket was torn, mud caked on her face and hands. When my light hit her, she pressed herself deeper into the hollow, whimpering. "Jessica, I'm Ranger Morrison. You're safe now." I kept my voice low, soothing, the way I'd talk to a spooked animal. "Where's Marcus?" She shook her head violently, tears cutting channels through the dirt on her cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It took him. Oh God, it took him." "What took him? A bear? Was it an animal?" She laughed then, a broken sound that raised the hair on my neck. "Not an animal, not human either. It walked like my grandmother, sounded like her, but its face..." She dissolved into sobs. I helped her out of the hollow, noting her ankle was swollen, probably sprained. She leaned heavily on me as we started back toward the ravine. I'd call for a full search team once we got to higher ground, bring in dogs to track Marcus. Animal attacks were rare but not unheard of in these parts. Black bears, the occasional mountain lion, though neither typically hunted humans. We'd made it halfway back to where I'd descended when Jessica suddenly gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped, listening. At first, nothing but the normal night sounds that had returned, an owl hooting, wind in the trees. Then I heard it. Footsteps moving parallel to us, maybe 30 feet away, hidden by the thick undergrowth. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to pause when we paused. "Marcus?" I called out. "Marcus Huang. If that's you, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, came a voice. An old woman's voice, speaking in what sounded like Cherokee, though I only knew a few words from my grandmother. The tone was conversational, almost friendly, but Jessica's reaction was immediate and violent. She pulled away from me and ran, injured ankle forgotten, crashing through the underbrush. "Wait!" I pursued her, my light beam swinging wildly. Behind us, those heavy footsteps began again, faster now, closing the distance with impossible speed. Whatever was following us wasn't trying to hide anymore. Branches snapped, something large bulldozing through the forest. I caught up to Jessica at the base of the ravine. She was trying to climb the muddy slope, fingers clawing at roots and rocks. I boosted her up, practically throwing her toward more stable ground. As I turned to follow, my headlamp swept across the opposite bank. There, at the edge of the light, stood a figure that my mind struggled to process. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, covered in what looked like deer hide that hung loose and wrong. But it was the face that made me scramble up the slope without looking back. A grotesque mixture of human and animal features, eyes that reflected my light like a nocturnal predator's, and a mouth that opened too wide as it smiled at me. It spoke again in that grandmother's voice, and though I didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. We were trespassing, and one of us had already paid the price. Jessica and I didn't stop moving until we burst onto the main trail, both of us gasping, covered in mud and scratches. My radio crackled to life as soon as we hit higher ground, and I called in everything: medical evacuation, search teams, the works. I kept the details vague, reporting a possible animal attack and one hiker still missing. How could I explain what we'd seen? I barely believed it myself. The helicopter arrived within an hour, spotlight sweeping the forest as it settled into the small clearing near the trailhead. Paramedics took Jessica, who'd gone into shock, mumbling about her grandmother's voice and things that walked wrong. I gave my report to my supervisor, sticking to facts: tracks leading off trail, signs of pursuit, one hiker injured and recovered, one still missing. "You look rattled," Supervisor Conway said, studying my face in the harsh light of the emergency vehicles. 12 years on the job, never seen you like this." "It was unusual," I managed. "Whatever spooked them, it wasn't any animal I've encountered before." The search team deployed at first light, dogs and volunteers combing the ravine. I should have been with them, but Conway ordered me to take the day, said I needed rest after being out all night. Truth was, I couldn't have gone back into those woods, not to that ravine where something walked upright and spoke with stolen voices. I drove home to my cabin on Deer Lake, 15 miles from the station on the forest's eastern edge. My grandfather had built it in the 50s, back when rangers were expected to live deep in their territory. The isolation had never bothered me before. I'd chosen this life specifically for the solitude. But that morning, the empty woods around my home felt oppressive. I tried to sleep, but kept seeing that face in the darkness, hearing that grandmother's voice coming from the wrong throat. When exhaustion finally took me, I dreamed of Marcus Huang running through endless trees, something patient and terrible following just out of sight. The radio woke me at sunset. "Morrison, you there? Conway needs you back at the station. They found something." I dressed quickly, noting my hands were steady despite the dread pooling in my stomach. The drive back seemed longer than usual, every shadow between the trees potentially hiding something that shouldn't exist. The search teams had returned to base, their faces grim. Conway met me at the door, his expression unreadable. "We found blood," he said quietly. "Lot of it, about a mile upstream from where you recovered the woman. No body, but..." He handed me an evidence bag containing tattered fabric. Marcus's jacket torn to ribbons, soaked in dried blood. "DNA will confirm, but the amount of blood loss..." He didn't need to finish. Nobody lost that much blood and walked away. "Any tracks? Signs of what did this?" Conway's jaw tightened. "That's the thing. Plenty of tracks, but they don't make sense. Looks like bare human feet, but wrong proportions. State wildlife biologist took casts, said he'd never seen anything like them. And Morrison?" He lowered his voice. 3 of the search team reported hearing someone calling their names from the woods. Voices of people they knew weren't there, spooked them pretty bad. I spent the next 2 days filling out reports, answering questions from state investigators who'd taken over the case. They classified it as a probable animal attack, though nobody could explain the strange tracks or the voice mimicry. Jessica Huang had been sedated and airlifted to Atlanta. Her family requested no contact from the Forest Service. On the 3rd night, I was back at my cabin, trying to convince myself that life would return to normal. The familiar routine of dinner, checking my gear, reviewing trail maps for the next day's patrol, all of it felt hollow, like I was playing at being the person I'd been before the ravine. The knock came just after 10 p.m. 3 deliberate raps on my front door, loud in the wilderness quiet. No vehicle sounds, no footsteps on the porch before the knocking. I lived at the end of a 2-mile dirt road, had motion sensors that should have alerted me to any approach. I grabbed my service weapon, a Glock I'd only ever used on rabid animals. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. The porch light had burned out. No, I realized with a chill, it had been working an hour ago when I'd stepped out for firewood. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin. Silence. Then, from directly outside the door, my mother's voice. "Honey, open up. It's cold out here." My mother lived in Phoenix, had for 20 years. She'd never visited my cabin, claimed the woods made her claustrophobic. But the voice was perfect, her slight Missouri drawl, the way she drew out her vowels. "I know what you are." I stepped back from the door, weapon raised. "My mother's in Arizona." A pause, then laughter. My mother's exact laugh, but wrong, like someone had learned the sound without understanding the emotion behind it. The doorknob turned, locked, thank God. Something scraped against the wood, testing. I backed toward the rear of the cabin, keeping the weapon trained on the front door. My satellite phone was in the bedroom. I could call for backup, get Conway and a team out here. The scraping stopped. Footsteps circled the cabin, heavy and deliberate. At each window, a pause, a tap on the glass. At the kitchen window, it spoke again, this time in Marcus Huang's voice. "Please, help me. I'm hurt. It's following me." I knew Marcus was dead, had seen the blood-soaked evidence, but the voice was so real, so desperate, that I almost moved toward the window. Almost. "You can't come in," I said loudly, remembering my grandmother's stories about things that needed permission to enter. "This is my home. You're not welcome here." The Marcus voice shifted mid-sentence into Conway's gruff tone. "Morrison, open the damn door. We've got an emergency." I reached the bedroom, grabbed the sat phone with trembling fingers. As I dialed, something slammed into the back door hard enough to rattle the frame. The line connected just as glass shattered in the living room. "Regional Dispatch, what's your emergency?" "This is Ranger Morrison, badge 4827. I need immediate backup at my location. Something's trying to break into my cabin." "Sir, can you describe..." The phone went dead. Through the bedroom doorway, I could see a shape pulling itself through the broken window. Too large, moving wrong. It stood up in my living room, deer hide hanging loose, that terrible mixed face turning to scan the cabin. When it spotted me, it smiled with too many teeth. "Found you," it said in my own voice. I fired 3 shots center mass. The thing staggered but didn't fall, dark liquid spilling from the wounds. It laughed, my laugh, recorded and played back wrong, and took a step forward. I dove through the bedroom window, glass tearing at my clothes, and ran for the truck. Behind me, wood splintered as the thing forced its way through the too small bedroom doorway. My keys were in my pocket, hands steady despite everything as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by the truck's lights, it stood in the ruins of my doorway. Not pursuing, just watching. As I threw the truck in reverse, it raised one wrong-jointed arm in what might have been a wave. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the 24-hour diner in town where truckers and insomniacs gathered. Only there, surrounded by people and fluorescent lights, did I let myself process what had happened. The thing had known where I lived, had come for me specifically. This wasn't random, wasn't just about territory or trespass. This was personal now. I couldn't go back to my cabin. The state police found it torn apart, blood that wasn't mine splattered on the walls, claw marks on every surface. They added it to the growing file on what they were calling the Kituwa incidents, though they had no real explanation for any of it. Conway put me up in the ranger station's bunk room, a cramped space usually reserved for seasonal workers. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard voices. My mother, Conway, dead Marcus Huang. All wrong, all hungry. I threw myself into research instead, digging through the station's archives for any similar incidents. The Forest Service kept meticulous records going back to the 1930s when Kituwa was first designated as protected land. What I found chilled me more than that night at the cabin. October 1952, Ranger James Whitehorse reported unusual wildlife behavior near Deer Lake. His final report mentioned hearing his deceased father calling to him from the woods. Whitehorse disappeared 3 days later. Search teams found only blood-stained clothing. September 1967, 2 hikers vanished on the Tsalagi Trail. A survivor claimed something wearing her sister's face had tried to lure her off the path, classified as mental breakdown following trauma. August 1978, entire family of campers disappeared from the Deer Lake campground. Only evidence was a child's diary describing the thing that sounds like mommy but walks funny. November 1991, Ranger Patricia Cloud reported an encounter with what she described as a shape stealer in her official report. Her supervisor had her committed for psychiatric evaluation. She never returned to work. The pattern was clear. Every 12 to 15 years, something happened in the same area. Always in autumn, always involving voice mimicry, always leaving blood but no bodies. The reports grew less detailed over time as supervisors became better at suppressing what they couldn't explain. I was deep in a 1984 file when Rita Crow walked into the records room. Rita ran the visitor center, had worked for the Forest Service longer than anyone. She was also Eastern Band Cherokee, her family having lived in these mountains since before written memory. "Heard you were digging through the old files," she said, pulling up a chair. "Finding what you're looking for?" "Finding more than I wanted," I admitted, showing her the pattern I'd mapped out. "Rita, what do you know about the old stories? The ones about things that steal voices?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying the dates I'd circled. "My grandmother called them the Nunahi, though that's not quite right. The Nunahi were spirit people, mostly benign. What you're dealing with..." She shook her head. "There's an older word, one we don't say. They're the corrupted ones, the shape-takers. Human once, maybe, but they broke sacred laws, wore the skins of animals in ways that were forbidden." "Skinwalkers," I said quietly. Rita's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "That's a Navajo word, but yes, similar concept. Every tribe has stories of those who gave up their humanity for power. The thing is, Morrison, these aren't just stories to us. My grandmother saw one in 1952, same year as your Ranger Whitehorse. Said it wore her brother's shape but smelled of death and old blood. How do you stop them? You don't." Her voice was flat. You survive them if you're lucky. They're drawn to fear, to isolation, the old protection rituals. She stood abruptly. I shouldn't be telling you this. Knowledge itself can be a summoning. But she left a book on the table when she departed. A leather-bound journal filled with handwritten Cherokee text and rough drawings. I couldn't read the language, but the illustrations were clear enough. Figures caught between human and animal, ceremonies involving fire and sacred plants, symbols drawn for protection. That night, 3 more hikers went missing from the Tsalagi Trail. The search teams found them 12 hours later, alive but catatonic, huddled together in a cave 5 miles from any marked path. They couldn't explain how they'd gotten there, remembered only following what they thought was a park ranger who kept his face turned away. The ranger had spoken to each of them in the voice of loved ones, promising safety if they just followed a little farther. Conway pulled me aside after the debriefing. State's sending in a special unit, he said quietly. They're classifying this as an unknown predator, bringing in hunters and trackers. They want all rangers paired up, no solo patrols. It's not an animal, I said. I know that. You know that. Hell, after what we've been finding, even the state boys are starting to wonder. But what else can we do? Tell them it's a monster from native legends? They'd shut us down, bring in psychiatrists instead of hunters. He assigned me to partner with Jake Rains, a young ranger fresh from training in Colorado. Jake was everything I'd been at his age, eager, confident, certain that preparation and protocol could handle anything the wilderness threw at us. I didn't have the heart to tell him otherwise. Our first patrol together was to check the Deer Lake campground, now closed to the public. The access road wound through dense forest, past the ruins of my grandfather's cabin. I kept my eyes forward as we passed, but Jake noticed the destroyed structure. What happened there? Animal attack, I said. Same one we're tracking. He accepted the lie easily. Why wouldn't he? In his world, animals were animals, following predictable patterns. He hadn't yet learned that some things in the forest were older than the trees, hungrier than any natural predator. The campground sat on a small peninsula jutting into Deer Lake, morning mist still clinging to the water's surface. We walked the perimeter, checking for signs of intrusion. The place felt wrong, too quiet, even the ever-present birds silent. Morrison, Jake called from near the boat launch. Got tracks here. I joined him, already knowing what we'd find. The now familiar elongated footprints led from the water's edge up the beach, disappearing into the grass. But these were different. Older, partially filled with sand. Whatever made them had come from the lake itself. That's not possible, Jake muttered, following the tracks with his eyes. They start in deep water. Nothing walks on the bottom of lakes. Maybe it swam to shore, then stood up, I offered, knowing it was weak. Jake shook his head, pulling out his camera to document the prints. As he knelt for a better angle, I heard it. A voice calling from across the lake, carried clearly over the still water. Jake, honey, where are you? He froze. That's my mom. But she's in Denver. The voice came again, closer now, though I could see nothing on the water. Jake, I'm hurt. Please help me. Jake started toward the water, and I grabbed his arm. That's not your mother. Whatever you hear, it's not real. But it sounds just like... I know, that's what it does. It mimics voices, uses them to lure people away. I pulled him back toward the truck. We're leaving. Now. The voice shifted, became angry. Don't you walk away from me, young man. I raised you better than this. Jake's face crumpled. The perfect reproduction of his mother's disappointed tone hit him like a physical blow. I had to practically drag him to the vehicle as the voice continued, mixing endearments with accusations, love with guilt. We'd almost reached the truck when it emerged from the lake. Water streamed from the deer hide it wore like a garment, lake weeds tangled in the patches of fur. It moved wrong, joints bending in ways that made my eyes water, trying to track the motion. The face was the worst part. Human features stretched over the wrong bone structure, like a mask made of living flesh. It smiled at Jake with his mother's mouth. There you are, sweetheart, Jake screamed. I shoved him into the truck and dove for the driver's seat, starting the engine as the thing approached with horrible, loping strides. It slammed into the side of the vehicle as I threw it in reverse, leaving deep gouges in the metal. As we fled down the access road, I glimpsed it in the mirror, standing in the road watching us go. It raised one hand to its throat, and I heard my own voice, broadcast impossibly loud. "You can't run from what you've awakened, Morrison. You brought this on yourself." Jake didn't speak for the entire drive back. At the station, he walked straight to Conway's office and turned in his badge. Left that same day, no explanation, no forwarding address. I envied him the luxury of walking away. That night, alone in the bunk room, I studied Rita's journal by flashlight. One passage, translated in pencil in the margin, stood out. "They hunger for what they've lost. Humanity leaves a void that echoes with voices. They fill the emptiness with others' sounds, others' shapes, but the hunger only grows. Born of violation, they violate in turn. The land remembers the first sin." Below it, a date. October 1838. The Trail of Tears. The forced removal of the Cherokee from these mountains. Had something been left behind? Something that had chosen to stay, no matter the cost? I was beginning to understand that this wasn't random. The land itself was wounded, and we were walking through its fever dreams. The state hunters arrived on a Thursday, 5 men with expensive rifles and thermal imaging equipment. They set up a base camp near the Tsalagi Trail, full of confidence and dismissive of what they called local superstitions. Conway had briefed them on the unusual tracks and the voice mimicry, which they attributed to some undiscovered primate species. "Could be a remnant population," their leader Hunt explained over coffee in the ranger station. "Gigantopithecus descendants, maybe. The voice thing could be advanced mimicry, like parrots or mynas. We've seen stranger things in remote areas." I didn't argue. Let them think they were hunting an animal. Maybe their disbelief would protect them, though I doubted it. Rita found me that evening in the records room, where I'd practically taken up residence. She carried a manila folder, yellow with age. "My grandmother left this," she said, setting it on the table. "I wasn't going to share it, but more people are going to die if I don't." Inside were photographs from the 1950s, grainy black and white images of the forest. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then Rita pointed to the backgrounds, a figure barely visible among the trees, always at the edge of frame, always watching. In one photo, dated October 1952, someone had circled the figure in red ink, written beneath, "James," before he changed. "James Whitehorse," I breathed. "The ranger who disappeared." "He didn't disappear," Rita corrected. "He became." My grandmother saw it happen, though nobody believed her. Said he'd found something in a cave near Deer Lake, old bones and older magic. Tried to use it to speak with his dead father, but when you open that door, Morrison, you don't get to choose what comes through. She showed me another photo, a cave mouth partially hidden by vegetation. This was taken 3 days before James vanished. He'd been visiting this place, claimed he was investigating archaeological sites. But grandmother followed him once, saw him conducting ceremonies, wearing things that shouldn't be worn. He became the skinwalker? One of them. Maybe the first in this area, maybe not. The corruption spreads, Morrison. Each one makes more if they can find someone desperate enough, lonely enough, guilty enough. They promise reunion with the dead, but the price? She shuddered. My radio crackled. "All units, we have an emergency at the hunter camp. Respond immediately." The scene we found would haunt me forever. 3 of the 5 hunters sat in a circle around their dead fire, eyes open but unseeing, mouths moving in silent conversation. Their weapons lay discarded, thermal equipment still running, showing nothing but the 3 men and empty forest. Hunt stood at the edge of camp, arguing violently with thin air. "Dad, I know it's you. I can see you. Why won't you talk to me?" The 5th hunter, Peters, was crouched behind an overturned vehicle, clutching a satellite phone. "It came after dark," he whispered when he saw us. Sounded like Hunt's father, called him out of the tent. Then it was my daughter, my wife, all of them calling from the woods. The others, they just walked out to meet them. I approached Hunt carefully. Up close, I could see his eyes tracking something invisible to the rest of us. "They're right there," he insisted. "My dad, my brother. They're explaining everything. About the accident, about why they had to leave." Hunt, Your family isn't here. You're experiencing an auditory hallucination." He turned on me, snarling. "You can't see them because you're not chosen. They only reveal themselves to family." His expression softened, looking past me again. "Yes, Dad, I understand. I'll come with you now." He took 3 steps toward the forest before Conway tackled him. It took 4 of us to restrain him as he fought and screamed, begging his dead father to wait for him. The other 3 hunters remained in their circle, lost in conversations with people who weren't there. The medical evacuation took 2 hours. By then, we'd found tracks all around the camp, dozens of them, as if a crowd had stood just beyond the firelight watching. But the thermal equipment showed only empty forest, and the motion sensors hadn't triggered once. Peters was the only one who could give a coherent report. "It wasn't just voices," he said, as the paramedics checked him over. "I saw them too for a moment. Shapes between the trees, almost human, but wrong. Like someone had tried to rebuild a person from memory and gotten the proportions off." That night, the state pulled their hunters out. Officially, they'd suffered from mass hysteria induced by a natural gas leak from underground deposits. Unofficially, Conway told me they were terrified, wanted nothing more to do with Kituwa Forest. "We're on our own," he said. "State's washing their hands of this. They're closing the forest indefinitely, citing unstable geological conditions. Maybe that's for the best. Keep people out until what? This thing goes back to sleep for another 15 years? How many more disappearances can we explain away?" He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "I've got 30 years in these woods, Morrison. I thought I knew every inch of them. Now I find out they've been hiding something like this the whole time." Rita was waiting for me in the records room, the cave photograph spread on the table. "If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, don't," she said. "That cave is forbidden for a reason. My people have stories." "Your people have been keeping this secret while hikers die," I interrupted, harsher than I intended. "If James Whitehorse started this, maybe there's a way to end it there." "You don't understand. The cave isn't just where he changed. It's where they were first made, back when my ancestors still lived freely in these mountains. A place of punishment for those who violated sacred laws. The worst criminals were sent there, transformed into warnings for others." She met my eyes. They were meant to be contained, but the removal changed everything. The guardians were forced to leave, the rituals of binding abandoned. And James found the old symbols and tried to use them backward, then helped me use them correctly. She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, "My grandmother's journal mentions a cleansing ritual. But Morrison, it requires someone to enter the cave, to face what's inside. No one who's attempted it has come back unchanged." "I'm already changed," I said, thinking of the voices that haunted my dreams, the way I jumped at shadows. "At least this way, it might mean something." We spent the rest of the night preparing. Rita taught me the words, Cherokee phrases I'd never be able to pronounce correctly, but had to try. She drew symbols on my arms with ash from sacred wood, wrapped protective items in cloth for me to carry. All the while, she looked like she was preparing me for burial. "The thing wearing James Whitehorse's shape isn't James anymore," she warned. "It remembers being human, but that just makes it crueler. It will use everything it knows about you, every grief, every regret. That's how it breaks you, from the inside." As dawn approached, I made my preparations. Weapon, though I knew bullets were useless, flashlights and flares, the journal with its rituals, and a photo from my wallet. My grandmother, dead 10 years, whose voice I'd been hearing in dreams since this all started. "When you hear the voices," Rita said as I prepared to leave, "remember, they're not your dead. They're the echo of loss itself, given form and hunger. Your grandmother is at peace. Whatever speaks with her voice is something else entirely." I nodded, though part of me wondered if I'd be strong enough to remember that when the time came. The human heart wants so badly to believe in reunion, in one more conversation with those we've lost. That desire was what the skinwalker fed on, what it used to catch its prey. The sun was rising as I drove toward Deer Lake, toward the cave that had birthed nightmares. Behind me, the forest stirred with morning birds and normal life. Ahead, something ancient and patient waited in the darkness, wearing faces stolen from memory and love. The coordinates Rita had given me led to a part of the forest I'd never patrolled, 2 miles north of Deer Lake, where the mountain slope was almost vertical and the trees grew at dizzying angles. No trails came near this area. The terrain was too dangerous for hikers, too unstable for development. Even wildlife seemed to avoid it. I had to leave the truck at an old logging road and continue on foot. The morning sun barely penetrated the canopy here, creating a perpetual twilight that made navigation difficult. Every step had to be carefully placed. One wrong move would send me tumbling down the mountainside. The cave mouth, when I finally found it, was smaller than the photographs suggested. Partially collapsed, hidden behind a fall of vines and decades of forest debris. If Rita hadn't been so specific about the landmarks, I would have walked right past it. The entrance exhaled cold air that smelled of deep earth and something else, something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in the dark. I cleared away enough vegetation to squeeze through, my flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness beyond. The cave opened into a larger chamber immediately inside, ceiling disappearing into shadow. The walls were covered in symbols, some carved, others painted with substances I didn't want to identify. Not all were Cherokee. I recognized older markings, petroglyphs that predated any known inhabitation of these mountains. My breath misted in the cold air as I moved deeper. The floor was littered with bones, animal mostly, but some disturbingly human-like. They'd been arranged in patterns, careful constructions that hurt to look at directly. At the center of the main chamber was what Rita had warned me about, the changing circle, where violations of natural law had been made manifest. It was marked by stones placed with deliberate precision, each one carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in my flashlight beam. Inside the circle, the floor was stained dark with substances I didn't examine too closely. This was where James Whitehorse had tried to pierce the veil between living and dead, where he'd found something waiting on the other side, eager to trade places. I began setting up Rita's protections, salt mixed with sacred herbs at the cardinal points, cedar smoke to cleanse the air, the words she'd taught me stumbling off my tongue. The cave seemed to resist, the darkness pressing closer with each syllable. My flashlight flickered, threatened to die. Then I heard it. Morrison. My own name in my grandmother's voice, exactly as she'd said it when I was young and in trouble. Not from any direction, but from inside my skull, intimate as memory. I've been waiting for you, sweetheart. It's so cold here, so dark. I continued the ritual, hands shaking as I placed the protective items. The voice grew more insistent. Don't you want to see me again? I have so much to tell you about your mother, about why I had to leave so soon. Please, Morrison, I'm so lonely. A shape moved at the edge of my vision. I turned, and there she was. My grandmother, as I remembered her. Silver hair in its characteristic bun, wearing the blue dress she'd been buried in. She stood just outside the circle, hands reaching toward me. You're not her, I said, but my voice cracked. Of course I am. Look at me. Remember Sunday dinners? Remember the songs I used to sing? And she began humming the lullaby she'd used when I was sick, note perfect. Tears burned my eyes. Every instinct screamed to go to her, to fall into those familiar arms. This was crueler than the monster in deer hide, this perfect reproduction of love. But Rita had prepared me well. I forced myself to look, really look. The shape was flawless except for the shadows. My grandmother cast none, and where her feet should have touched the cave floor, there was only darkness. You're the echo, I said, stronger now, the hunger wearing her face, but she's gone, and you're just the thing that ate James Whitehorse. The gentle expression twisted into something terrible. The face remained the same, but wrong now, features sliding into configurations that shouldn't exist. When it spoke again, the voice multiplied. My grandmother, my mother, Conway, Jessica Huang, Marcus, dozens of others layering into a symphony of stolen sounds. Clever little ranger, but knowing doesn't change the hunger. It stepped into the circle, and I saw its true form. Neither human nor animal, but something between raw muscle and exposed bone wrapped in memories. The deer hide wasn't clothing, but part of it, fused to flesh that constantly shifted between states. Where its heart should have been was a void, an absence that pulled at the eye. I spoke the binding words Rita had taught me. Cherokee syllables harsh in my throat. The thing laughed with 100 voices. Those words are for the original ones, the punished. I am evolution, little ranger. I am what happens when the cage is left open and the guards abandon their posts. It moved closer, and I smelled grave earth and old sorrow. Your people drove out the keepers, left the forbidden places unguarded. James found us waiting and offered himself so willingly, as will you. The ritual. The ritual requires sacrifice. Yes, but not what you think. It gestured to the bones around us. Each one thought they could bind us, send us back. Each one became us instead. The hunger must be fed, Ranger. If not willing victims, then heroes who think they can save everyone. I understood then. Rita had known. Had sent me here knowing what would happen because someone had to try. Someone had to feed the thing to keep it from hunting the innocent. A ranger's duty, she'd probably say. Protecting the forest and its people, even at the ultimate cost. But I'd come prepared for betrayal too. From my pack, I pulled the one thing I hadn't told Rita about, my grandfather's journal found in the ruins of my cabin. He'd known about the cave, had made his own study of the skinwalker problem. And he'd found a different solution, one the Cherokee had forgotten or chosen to forget. Fire, I said, pulling out the road flare. The original punishment wasn't transformation, it was burning. The change came after to make the suffering eternal. But fire still remembers its first purpose. The thing's many voices rose in alarm as I struck the flare. The cave filled with hellish red light that made the symbols on the walls seem to dance. You'll burn too, Ranger. The fire cleanses all. I know, I said, and dropped the flare into the circle. The sacred herbs Rita had given me weren't just for protection. They were accelerants, mixed with oils that had been used in funeral rites for centuries. The circle erupted in flames that burned with colors that shouldn't exist, fed by the bones and darker things that littered the floor. The skinwalker screamed with every voice it had stolen, the sound shaking dust from the ceiling. It tried to flee, but the fire followed, hungry for the unnatural flesh. I saw James Whitehorse's face bubble up through the mass of features, eyes momentarily lucid, mouth forming the words, "Thank you," before dissolving back into the hole. The heat drove me backward, out of the chamber as the fire spread to the walls themselves. The symbols burned brightest of all, as if they'd been waiting centuries for release. The mountain shook, sections of the cave beginning to collapse. I barely made it out, diving through the entrance as the entire hillside seemed to convulse. Behind me, the cave mouth disappeared in a thunderous cascade of rock and earth, sealing whatever remained inside. The fire still burned beneath. I could feel the heat through the ground, see smoke rising through cracks in the stone. It took me 3 hours to make it back to my truck, burned and bleeding, ears still ringing from the skinwalker's death screams. The forest felt different already, lighter somehow, as if a pressure I hadn't consciously noticed had finally lifted. Conway was waiting at the station with Rita and a medical team. They'd seen the smoke, felt the earthquake that had registered on seismographs 50 miles away. Rita took one look at my burns, the strange patterns they formed, and nodded. It's done then. The cave is sealed. The thing that was James Whitehorse is gone. I accepted the water someone handed me, winced as medics began treating the burns. But Rita, the journal mentioned others. Other caves, other places where the punishment was carried out. Not here, she said firmly. This was the only one in Kituwa. The others, they're problems for other forests, other rangers. You've done enough. But as they loaded me into the ambulance, I heard Conway on the radio, fielding calls from forests across the Appalachians. Strange tracks spotted. Hikers reporting familiar voices calling from empty woods. The seal broken in one place seemed to have awakened things in others. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it. Tried not to wonder what would crawl out of other caves, wearing other faces, carrying the hunger forward. I'd saved Kituwa Forest, but the price of knowledge is knowing how much darkness remains. They kept me in the hospital for a week, treating burns that formed patterns no doctor could explain. The official report blamed a gas pocket explosion, same as the hunter's madness. The cave area was designated as critically unstable, off limits indefinitely. The forest reopened a month later with new warnings about geological dangers. I never returned to active duty. The burns healed but left scars that ache when the weather changes, that burn when I hear certain sounds. Conway gave me a desk job, let me train new rangers in safety protocols. I don't tell them about skinwalkers or stolen voices, but I do tell them to trust their instincts, to leave when the forest goes too quiet, to never follow familiar voices into the dark. Sometimes hikers still go missing in other forests. Sometimes they're found days later speaking to people who aren't there. Each time, I remember the skinwalker's words about evolution, about hunger spreading like infection. Each time I touch the scars on my arms and wonder if sealing one cave was enough. But mostly, I try to forget. I live in town now, surrounded by people and noise and electric lights that never let the darkness get too deep. On quiet nights, I still hear my grandmother's voice calling from the woods behind my apartment. I double-check the locks and turn up the television, drowning out the sound. Because I know what waits in the space between human and animal, between living and dead. I know how thin the boundary is, how easily crossed. And I know that somewhere in the deep woods, in caves yet undiscovered, other hungry things wait for someone desperate enough to listen when the dead seem to speak. The forest keeps its secrets. I intend to keep mine. Some doors once opened can never fully close. The Wenatchee National Forest wasn't just my workplace, it was my sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the modern world faded away and only the rhythm of nature remained. As a park ranger with 8 years of experience, I'd grown accustomed to the forest's patterns, its moods, and its secrets, or at least I thought I had. My name is Morgan Reeves, and on that fateful October morning, I had no idea that everything I understood about these woods was about to be shattered. The rain had been relentless for 3 days, turning the forest floor into a sodden mess and sending small cascades down the mountainsides. But today, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind that distinctive scent of petrichor mixed with pine that always filled me with a sense of renewal. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating the mist that rose from the forest floor like ghostly fingers reaching for the sky. I was preparing for what should have been a routine rescue operation. A group of hikers from various countries, 2 Canadians, an Australian couple, a British academic, an Indian tech worker, and a Filipino journalist, had been reported missing after failing to return from a 3-day trek to Nahanni Lake. The lake was nestled in a remote valley about 15 miles from the nearest road access, surrounded by some of the densest forest in the region. "Morgan, you ready to head out?" Sheriff Dawson's voice crackled over the radio. He wasn't officially part of our search and rescue team, but in a small community like ours, jurisdictions often blurred when people went missing. "Almost. Just checking the maps one more time," I replied, studying the topographical details of the area where the hikers were last seen. "They signed the trail register at Blackwater Ridge 3 days ago, but never checked in at the Nahanni campsite. Something's off about this one, Dawson." "What do you mean?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound superstitious. "That area has a history. The locals call it Waktek territory." "Wak what now?" "Waktek. It's a Salish term, roughly translates to forest guardian or wild man of the woods. The indigenous peoples have stories going back centuries about a creature that protects those forests." Dawson's laugh crackled over the radio. "Don't tell me you believe in Bigfoot, Reeves." I felt my jaw tighten. I believe in respecting local knowledge and traditions. Those stories persisted for a reason. Well, whatever's out there, we've got 7 missing hikers to find. Choppers ready when you are. I finished gathering my gear, emergency medical supplies, extra rations, sleeping bag, GPS, satellite phone, and my trusty rifle. I wasn't planning to use the weapon, but in these remote areas you never knew what kind of wildlife you might encounter, or at least, that's what I told myself. The helicopter ride gave us a bird's-eye view of the vast wilderness below. Miles of undulating green, interrupted only by the occasional clearing or rocky outcrop. From up here, it was easy to see how someone could get lost. The forest seemed to stretch to the horizon, an ocean of trees that could swallow a person whole. "There's the trailhead," I pointed, and the pilot began descending toward a small clearing near Blackwater Ridge. As soon as my boots hit the ground, I felt it, that subtle shift in the atmosphere that experienced rangers learn to recognize. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant gurgle of a stream. The search team consisted of myself, Dawson, two other rangers named Ellie Chen and Marcus Washington, and a local guide named Robert who knew these woods better than anyone. He was part Salish, and I noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the tree line as we prepared our gear. "You feel it too?" I asked him quietly. He nodded, his weathered face grim. "Something's not right here. The forest is listening." I suppressed a shiver. "Let's find these people and get out of here." We started along the trail the hikers would have taken, looking for any signs of their passage. The recent rain had washed away most tracks, but we occasionally found a boot print preserved in mud or a broken branch that indicated someone had passed through. About 3 miles in, Ellie called out, "Morgan, look at this." She was pointing to a small clearing just off the trail, a campsite, hastily abandoned. A tent was still standing, though partially collapsed from the rain. Another was torn, its fabric ripped as if by powerful hands. Cooking equipment lay scattered, and a backpack hung from a tree branch, the recommended method for keeping food away from bears. "They were here," I said, examining the site, "but something made them leave in a hurry." "Bear attack?" suggested Marcus. I shook my head. No blood, no tracks, and bears would have gone for the food. I pointed to the untouched backpack. Robert was crouched near the edge of the clearing, examining something on the ground. "Morgan," he called, his voice unnaturally tight. "You need to see this." I walked over and felt my blood turn to ice. There, pressed into a patch of mud, was a footprint. But not a human footprint, and not any animal print I recognized. It was enormous, at least 16 inches long and proportionally wide. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was extremely heavy. "That's not a bear," whispered Ellie, who had come up behind me. "No," I agreed. "It's not." Robert met my eyes, and I could see the fear in them. "Waktek," he said softly. Dawson had joined us now, and he scoffed. "Come on, people. It's probably just a deformed bear print, or a hoax the hikers were playing." But I knew better. The print was too clear, too defined. 5 toes, an arch, a heel. Unmistakably a foot, but far too large to be human. "Let's keep moving," I said firmly, trying to keep the tension from my voice. Those hikers could still be alive out there. As we continued deeper into the forest, the sense of being watched intensified. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers. The underbrush grew thicker, and the trail became harder to follow. And then we found the next sign, a camera, hanging from a low branch, gently swinging in the breeze. It belonged to one of the hikers, Anjali, the Indian tech worker. She'd been documenting their trip for her travel blog. I carefully removed it and checked if it still worked. The battery was low, but had enough power for us to review the most recent photos. The images started normally enough. Smiling hikers posing against beautiful mountain backdrops, close-ups of interesting plants and small wildlife, camp meals being prepared. But the final few photos sent chills down my spine. The last clear image showed the group around a campfire at dusk. They looked happy, if a bit tired from their trek. But in the background, barely visible in the gathering darkness, stood a figure at the tree line. Tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably not human. The next photo was blurry, as if taken in haste. The campsite now in disarray. Something large and dark moving at the edge of the frame. The final image was pure blackness, except for a pair of reflective eyes catching the flash. Eyes that seemed to hold an ancient intelligence and hunger. "Jesus," breathed Marcus, looking over my shoulder. I switched the camera off, trying to process what I'd just seen. "We need to pick up the pace. If they're still alive." A sound cut through the forest, a long, low howl that was neither wolf nor any other animal I could identify. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Robert's face had gone ashen. "That's it. That's Waktek's call." "It's just the wind," insisted Dawson, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. The howl came again, closer this time, and with it, a crashing sound. Something large moving through the underbrush, heading straight for us. "Run!" I shouted, and nobody argued. We tore through the forest, abandoning the trail in our panic. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us, but the sound of pursuit drove us forward. Whatever was behind us was gaining ground with terrifying speed. I risked a glance back and caught a glimpse of movement, a massive, hair-covered form loping between the trees with unnatural grace for its size. In that split second, our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of recognition that defied explanation. This wasn't just an animal. There was an intelligence there, ancient and predatory. We burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt. Before us stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. It looked abandoned, but it was the only shelter in sight. "Inside!" I ordered, and we scrambled through the doorway just as another howl split the air, this one so close it seemed to vibrate through my bones. The cabin was musty and dark, its interior Spartan, a rusted wood stove, a few broken pieces of furniture, dust-covered shelves. But it had 4 walls and a roof, which was all we needed right now. "What the hell was that?" gasped Ellie, her face pale with shock. "You know what it was," said Robert quietly. "The stories are true." Dawson was pacing, agitated. "This is insane. There's no such thing as Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever the hell you want to call it." "Then what was chasing us?" demanded Marcus. "What made that footprint? What's in those photos?" I moved to the window, carefully peering out. The forest had gone silent again, but the sense of being watched remained. Whatever had been chasing us was still out there, waiting. "We need to barricade the door and windows," I said, "and then we need to figure out our next move." As we worked to secure the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled into something ancient and dangerous, a conflict that had been playing out in these woods long before humans built roads and visitor centers. And somewhere out there were 7 missing hikers who might have encountered the same entity. Night was falling, and with it came the realization that we were trapped in this cabin, in the heart of what the locals called Waktek territory. And based on what I'd seen, I was beginning to understand why these legends had persisted for centuries. Something was out there in the darkness. Something that walked on 2 legs, but wasn't human. Something that knew these woods far better than we ever could. And it was hunting. The cabin creaked and groaned around us as night descended, its ancient timbers protesting against the rising wind. We had managed to barricade the door with a broken table and covered the windows with whatever we could find. The only light came from our flashlights, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "We need to contact base," Dawson said, breaking the tense silence. "Let them know what we found." I pulled out the satellite phone, but the screen remained dark. "Dead," I muttered, examining it. "That's impossible. I charged it before we left." "Radio?" suggested Ellie. Marcus tried his, then shook his head. Nothing but static. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. First the unnatural silence of the forest, then the footprint, the photos, and now our communications equipment failing. It felt deliberate, as if something was isolating us. "It doesn't want us to call for help," Robert said, voicing what I was thinking. His dark eyes reflected the flashlight beam, giving him an otherworldly appearance. "That's ridiculous," scoffed Dawson, but his voice lacked conviction. "Equipment fails all the time in these conditions." I moved to the window, carefully peering through a gap in our makeshift covering. The forest was a wall of darkness, impenetrable even with my flashlight. But something moved out there. Shadows within shadows, circling the cabin like a predator sizing up its prey. "We need to start a fire," I decided, for warmth and light. The old wood stove was rusty but intact. We found some dry wood in a corner of the cabin and soon had a small fire going. The warmth was welcome, but the dancing light only seemed to make the shadows deeper, more menacing. As we huddled around the stove, I took stock of our situation. We had enough supplies for 2 days, 3 if we rationed carefully. The cabin offered shelter, but it was far from secure. And something was out there, watching and waiting. "What do we know about the Waktek legends?" I asked Robert, deciding that understanding what we might be facing was crucial. Robert was quiet for a moment, his face solemn in the firelight. The stories vary from tribe to tribe, but there are consistencies. Waktek is described as a guardian of the forest, standing between 7 and 10 feet tall, covered in thick hair. Some say it's a single creature, others that there's a whole species of them living in the most remote areas. But what does it want? Pressed Ellie. To be left alone, mostly, Robert replied. The legends say it only becomes aggressive when humans encroach too far into its territory or threaten the forest somehow. So why would it attack a group of hikers? Asked Marcus. Robert shook his head. I don't know. Maybe they went somewhere they shouldn't have. Or maybe... A sudden thud against the wall made us all jump. Something had struck the cabin with considerable force. We froze, listening intently. Another thud followed, then another, methodical, purposeful. It's testing the structure, I whispered, my mouth dry with fear. The thuds continued, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. When they reached the door, our makeshift barricade shuddered under the impact. Dawson drew his sidearm, pointing it at the door. If that thing comes through, I'm shooting. No, hissed Robert. That will only make it angrier. Before Dawson could respond, a new sound emerged, a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to vibrate through the cabin walls. It wasn't quite speech, but it carried cadence and intention, rising and falling like a distorted version of language. Is it talking? Ellie whispered, her eyes wide. The Salish believed Waktek had its own language, Robert said quietly. Some even claimed to understand parts of it. The vocalization continued, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. And then, so faint I almost missed it, came a human voice from somewhere outside. Help. Please. I met Dawson's eyes across the room. Did you hear that? He nodded grimly. Could be one of the hikers. Or it could be a trap, I thought, but didn't say. Stories of mimicry were common in folklore surrounding forest creatures. Another plea came, slightly louder. Is anyone there? Please help. That's Anjali's voice, I realized, recognizing it from videos she'd posted online that we'd reviewed before the search. She's alive. Morgan, wait. Robert grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. It might not be her. Waktek is known to mimic human voices to lure people out. I hesitated, torn between the duty to rescue and the instinct for self-preservation. We can't just leave her out there if she's alive. Please, the voice called again, breaking with desperation. It's coming back. That decided it. I couldn't ignore a call for help, no matter the risk. I'm going out there. The rest of you stay here. Like hell, said Dawson, checking his gun. I'm coming with you. Me too, added Ellie, her face determined despite her fear. Marcus nodded his agreement, and Robert, after a moment's hesitation, said, We stay together. That's our best chance. We removed the barricade and opened the door just enough to peer out. The night was alive with sounds now. The wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of underbrush. Normal forest sounds that somehow felt staged, as if the forest was putting on a performance of normalcy. Anjali, I called softly. Where are you? Here. The voice came from a cluster of trees about 50 yards from the cabin. Please hurry! With flashlights and weapons ready, we moved cautiously toward the voice. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. We reached the spot where the voice had come from, but found nothing. No Anjali, no signs of recent human presence. Anjali, I called again, sweeping my flashlight in a wide arc. Help me. The voice now came from further into the trees, fainter, more desperate. It's leading us away from the cabin, observed Marcus nervously. We should go back, agreed Robert. This doesn't feel right. But as we turned, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night, unmistakably human, filled with terror and pain. It was cut off abruptly, leaving an echo that seemed to hang in the air. That was real, I said with certainty, my blood running cold. Someone's in trouble. We plunged into the forest, following the direction of the scream. The terrain became steeper, the underbrush thicker. Our flashlights created confusing patterns of light and shadow, making it hard to tell what was a tree and what might be something else. And then I saw her. Angeli was propped against a tree, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dirt and blood. She was alive but barely conscious, her eyes unfocused. "Angeli," I said gently, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "We're search and rescue. We're here to help you." Her eyes widened with recognition, then fear. "Run," she whispered. "It's still here." A branch snapped behind us, a deliberate sound like something wanted us to know it was there. We turned as one, flashlights cutting through the darkness. It stood not 20 feet away, partially obscured by a tree but unmistakable in its otherness. Massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. Its body was powerfully built, with broad shoulders and long arms, and its face, not quite human, not quite ape, with deep-set eyes that reflected our flashlights with an eerie intelligence. Waktek, the forest guardian, Bigfoot. Whatever name you gave it, the creature of legend was real, and it was standing before us. For a long moment, nobody moved. Even breathing seemed dangerous, as if the slightest sound might trigger violence. Then Dawson raised his gun. "Don't," I hissed, but it was too late. The creature moved with shocking speed, vanishing into the darkness just as Dawson fired. The gunshot was deafening in the quiet forest, and I knew instantly it was a mistake. A roar of rage answered the gunshot, echoing from all directions as if the forest itself was screaming in anger. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said urgently, moving to help Angeli to her feet. "Now." Marcus and Ellie supported Angeli between them, while Dawson, Robert, and I formed a protective circle, our flashlights and weapons pointed outward. We began moving back the way we had come, every sense straining for signs of the creature's return. The forest had come alive with sounds, crashing underbrush, breaking branches, those same vocalizations we'd heard earlier but now filled with unmistakable rage. It was tracking us, paralleling our course, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind, as if it knew these woods so well it could predict our path. "It's hurting us," realized Robert with dawning horror, "like a predator." "But where's it driving us?" asked Ellie, adjusting her grip on Angeli, who was struggling to remain conscious. I had a sickening feeling I knew the answer. Away from the cabin, away from safety. Sure enough, when we reached what should have been the clearing with the cabin, we found only more forest. Somehow, we had been turned around. "This is impossible," muttered Dawson, his earlier skepticism crumbling in the face of what was happening. We followed our own trail back. "Waktek knows these woods better than we ever could," said Robert. "The stories say it can make you lose your way, make paths disappear and new ones appear." Angeli stirred, her eyes focusing briefly. "The others," she mumbled. "It has them." "The other hikers?" I asked, leaning closer to hear her weak voice. "Where are they, Angeli?" "Cave. By the lake," she managed before slipping back into semi-consciousness. A cave by Nahanni Lake. That gave us a destination, at least. But the lake was miles away, and we were lost in a forest that seemed to be actively working against us, stalked by a creature straight out of legend. The night stretched ahead, dark and full of dangers. And somewhere in these ancient woods, 6 more people were waiting for rescue, held captive by something that shouldn't exist. We were no longer the rescuers. We had become the ones in need of rescue. As we stood there, lost and afraid, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed some invisible boundary, from the world of the known into a realm where ancient forces still held sway. And the rules of this realm were very different from the ones I had lived by all my life. The forest had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Waiting. Dawn broke reluctantly over the forest, as if the sun itself was hesitant to illuminate what lurked among the ancient trees. We had spent the night huddled together in a makeshift camp, taking turns keeping watch. None of us had slept much. Angeli was in rough shape, dehydrated, exhausted, with numerous cuts and bruises. We had treated her injuries as best we could with our limited supplies, but she needed proper medical attention. During the night, she had drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling fragments that painted a disturbing picture. The hiking group had been attacked 3 nights ago while camping near Nahanni Lake. Something had come out of the darkness, something large and powerful that moved with unnatural speed. It had taken the others one by one, dragging them away into the night. Angeli had managed to escape only because she'd been relieving herself away from camp when the attack began. She'd been hiding and running ever since, trying to find her way back to civilization. We need to get her to a hospital, Ellie said, checking Angeli's pulse for the third time that hour. First, we need to figure out where we are, I replied, scanning our surroundings in the gray morning light. The forest looked different somehow, older, wilder. The trees seemed larger, their bark darker, the undergrowth more tangled. It was as if we had stumbled into a primeval version of the forest we knew. Robert was studying the moss on a nearby tree. The moss grows thicker on the north side. If we head east, we should eventually hit the main trail or at least the river. It was basic wilderness survival, but right now basics were all we had. What about the other hikers? Asked Marcus. Angeli said they're in a cave by the lake. I weighed our options. Angeli needed medical attention, and we were all exhausted and low on supplies. But 6 lives hung in the balance. We split up. Ellie, you and Marcus take Angeli east, try to find the trail or the river. Dawson, Robert, and I will head for the lake to look for the others. Splitting up is exactly what that thing wants, objected Dawson. We don't have a choice, I said firmly. Angeli won't survive much longer without help, and neither will the others if they're injured. Reluctantly, we divided our supplies. I gave Ellie my GPS unit, not that it had been working properly in these woods, but it was better than nothing. If you find the trail, follow it south to the ranger station. If you hit the river, follow it downstream. Get help and send it to Nahanni Lake. Ellie nodded, her face grim but determined. Be careful, Morgan. That thing, it's not just a dumb animal. I know, I said quietly. That's what worries me. We parted ways as the forest awakened around us. Birds began to call, small animals rustled in the underbrush, and mist rose from the damp ground in ghostly tendrils. It all seemed so normal, yet there was an undercurrent of wrongness that I couldn't shake. Dawson, Robert, and I moved west, where we believed Nahanni Lake lay. The terrain was challenging, steep in places with fallen trees and dense underbrush that seemed to grab at our clothes and equipment. But more disturbing was the sense that the forest was changing around us, subtly altering itself to confuse and misdirect. The landmarks don't match the map, muttered Dawson, comparing his topographical map to our surroundings for the 10th time. It's like we're in a completely different part of the forest. Or like the forest itself is moving, suggested Robert, his voice low. The Salish elders spoke of this, how Waktek could bend the paths, make trails disappear, create new ones where none existed before. That's impossible, Dawson scoffed, but his eyes darted nervously to the trees around us. I remained silent, focusing on finding a way forward. Skepticism was a luxury we couldn't afford right now. As midday approached, the mist that had lingered in the forest began to thicken rather than dissipate. It curled around trees and rocks, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to watch us as we passed. The temperature dropped noticeably, and our breath began to fog in the chill air. This isn't natural, Robert whispered, his eyes wide. It's a sign. Of what? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Waktek is near. The mist follows it. As if in confirmation, a low, rumbling vocalization echoed through the trees, that same not-quite speech we had heard the night before. It surrounded us, seeming to come from every direction at once. We froze, backs together, scanning the mist-shrouded forest. Visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet, turning the trees into looming silhouettes. What's it saying? I whispered to Robert. He shook his head. I don't know the exact words, but the tone. It's a warning. It's telling us to turn back. Like hell we will, growled Dawson, his hand on his holstered weapon. The vocalization came again, louder this time, with a rhythmic quality that was almost hypnotic. And then, impossibly, words began to form within it, distorted, guttural, but recognizable. Leave this place. Dawson's face went pale. Did you hear that? I nodded, unable to speak. It was communicating directly with us, using English words embedded within its strange language. The implications were staggering. Not yours. Go. Back. It's intelligent, I breathed. Truly intelligent. The elders always said so, Robert replied. They believed Waktek was an ancient race that lived in these forests long before humans arrived. Another sound cut through the mist. A human cry, faint but unmistakable. It came from somewhere ahead of us. "That's one of the hikers," I said, already moving forward despite the warning we'd just received. "Morgan, wait," Robert called after me. But I was already pushing through the underbrush, following the sound. The mist seemed to part before me, creating a tunnel-like path that I followed without questioning. Behind me, I could hear Dawson and Robert struggling to keep up, calling my name, but their voices grew fainter as I pressed on. I emerged into a small clearing where the mist swirled in ethereal patterns. At the center stood a solitary figure, a man in torn hiking clothes, his back to me. "Hello?" I called cautiously. "I'm Ranger Morgan Reeves. We're here to help you." The man turned slowly, and I felt my blood freeze. It was one of the missing hikers, the British academic named James, but his eyes were wrong, vacant, unfocused, as if he wasn't truly present. "You shouldn't have come," he said in a monotone voice. "This isn't your place." "James, are you hurt? Where are the others?" He tilted his head, studying me with those empty eyes. "The Guardian knows you now. It's seen inside you, seen your fears, your doubts." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold mist. This wasn't James speaking, not really. Something was using him, speaking through him. "Where are the others?" I repeated, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Safe, sleeping, learning." A smile spread across his face that never reached those vacant eyes. "As you will learn." "Learn what?" "The old ways, the true nature of the forest, what was here before." His head tilted further, an unnatural angle. "You think you know these woods, Ranger. You know nothing." Behind me, I heard Dawson and Robert finally pushing through the underbrush into the clearing. James's eyes flickered to them, then back to me. "The Guardian has a message for you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Leave now, or join the others, forever." Before I could respond, James's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I rushed forward, checking his pulse, weak but steady. He was alive, but deeply unconscious. "What the hell was that?" demanded Dawson, his face ashen. "Some kind of possession," said Robert, his voice shaking. "The stories speak of Waktek being able to influence human minds, speak through them." I looked down at James's unconscious form. "We need to get him out of here." "And go where?" asked Dawson. "We're lost in this damn forest with that thing hunting us." I was about to respond when the mist around us began to move with purpose, swirling into a vortex that enveloped the clearing. Within it, shadowy figures took shape, human-like but not human, tall and powerful, moving with fluid grace around the perimeter of the clearing. "It's surrounding us," whispered Robert. The mist shapes closed in, their movements synchronized like dancers in some ancient ritual. And through the mist came that voice again, resonating in my bones. "Come, see, understand." A gap opened in the circle of mist figures, revealing a path leading deeper into the forest. An invitation or a trap. "We're not going anywhere with you," declared Dawson, drawing his weapon. "Show yourself." The mist shapes paused, then began to dissipate, the vortex collapsing. For a moment, I thought we had won some small victory. Then I saw it, standing at the edge of the clearing where the path led into the forest. Waktek stood fully revealed in the daylight, its massive form no longer hidden by darkness or mist. It was even more imposing than I had imagined, over 8 feet tall, with a powerful build covered in thick reddish-brown hair. Its face was a disturbing blend of human and ape-like features, with a pronounced brow and deep-set eyes that reflected an intelligence far beyond any animal's. What struck me most was its posture, upright, confident, almost regal. This was no mere beast, this was something else entirely. It extended one massive hand, palm up, in a gesture that was unmistakably an invitation. Then it turned and walked into the forest, clearly expecting us to follow. "We're not seriously considering this, are we?" Dawson hissed. I looked down at James, still unconscious, then at the path where Waktek had disappeared. "It knows where the others are. It's offering to take us to them." "Or to our deaths," countered Dawson. "If it wanted us dead, we would be already," I pointed out. "It's had multiple opportunities." Robert nodded in agreement. "The legends say Waktek only kills when threatened or when defending its territory. It prefers to frighten intruders away. Well, it's doing a damn good job of that, muttered Dawson. I made my decision. I'm going to follow it. The two of you can take James and try to find your way back, or you can come with me, but I'm not leaving the other hikers out there. There was a moment of tense silence, then Robert sighed. I'll come with you. My ancestors would never forgive me if I turned away from this. Dawson looked between us, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he holstered his weapon. Fine, but we're bringing him with us. He gestured to James. I'm not leaving anyone behind in this godforsaken forest. Together, we lifted James's unconscious form and began to follow the path into the forest. The mist seemed to guide us, thinning ahead to show the way and thickening behind to obscure our retreat. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted it had only been 40 minutes. The forest grew older around us, the trees massive and ancient, their canopy so thick that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. Moss covered everything, and fungi of types I'd never seen before glowed with a faint bioluminescence in the shadows. We're going downhill, observed Robert, deeper into the valley. He was right. The terrain had been gradually sloping downward, leading us into a part of the forest I didn't recognize from any map or survey. The air was different here too, heavier, more oxygen-rich, with a primal scent that reminded me of rich loam and ancient growth. Finally, the path opened onto the shores of a lake, but not Nahanni Lake as we knew it. This body of water was larger, its waters a deep, crystal blue that seemed to glow from within. Mist hovered over its surface, and at its center was a small island covered in dense vegetation. And along the shoreline was a series of cave openings, their entrances partially hidden by hanging vines and moss. This isn't on any map, I said, my voice hushed with awe. Because it isn't supposed to be here, replied Robert. The elders spoke of hidden places in the forest, pockets of the old world that exist alongside our own but separate from it. Sacred spaces where the veil between worlds is thin. Dawson, still supporting one side of the unconscious James, looked around with wide eyes. So what? We've stepped into some kind of parallel dimension. That's crazy. Is it any crazier than an 8-foot-tall forest guardian that can control mist and speak through humans? I asked. Before he could answer, movement caught my eye. Waktek had appeared at the entrance to one of the larger caves, watching us with those uncannily intelligent eyes. It made that beckoning gesture again, then disappeared into the darkness of the cave. It wants us to follow, I said, already moving forward. Into a cave? With that thing? No way, protested Dawson. But Robert and I were already heading for the cave entrance, giving him little choice but to follow with James. The cave mouth was larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily 15 feet high and twice as wide. Inside, the temperature dropped several degrees, and that strange bioluminescent fungi provided just enough light to see by, growing in patterns along the walls that almost looked deliberate, like writing in some ancient, forgotten language. The passage descended gently, widening into a vast chamber that took my breath away. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above us, supported by natural columns of stone that had been worn smooth by water over millennia. More of the glowing fungi illuminated the space with a soft, blue-green light, and there, arranged in a semicircle in the center of the chamber, were the missing hikers. They lay on beds of moss, apparently asleep or unconscious, but unharmed from what I could see. Their breathing was deep and regular, their faces peaceful. "Are they drugged?" whispered Dawson as we approached cautiously. I checked the pulse of the nearest hiker, a young Canadian woman named Marie. Steady and strong, they seemed to be in some kind of deep sleep. "Look at their eyes," said Robert. I gently lifted one of Marie's eyelids. Her pupil was dilated and her eye moved rapidly beneath the lid, the characteristic sign of REM sleep. She was dreaming, and intensely so. "They're all the same," confirmed Dawson, checking another hiker. We laid James down beside the others, and he immediately settled into the same deep, dream-filled sleep. But what's keeping them like this? I wondered aloud. And why? A sound from the back of the chamber drew our attention. Waktek emerged from a smaller passage, followed by two more creatures of its kind, one slightly larger, with silvering hair, and one smaller, more slender. A family group, I realized with a shock. Not just one creature, but a small community of them. They approached us slowly, moving with that same fluid grace that seemed impossible for beings of their size. The original Waktek, who I now realized was probably male, made a series of gestures and vocalizations to the others. The oldest one, possibly a female, stepped forward and extended her hand toward me. In her palm was a small, glowing mushroom unlike any I had ever seen. Its cap pulsed with a soft, hypnotic light. "Don't touch it," warned Dawson. But Robert gasped in recognition. The dream fungi. The elders spoke of this. It allows one to communicate with the spirit world, to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. The female Waktek continued to hold out the mushroom, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. This was a test, I realized, a challenge. Would I trust enough to take what was offered? I reached out slowly and took the mushroom from her massive hand. It felt warm, almost vibrating with energy. "Morgan, don't," pleaded Dawson. "You don't know what that thing will do to you." But I did know, somehow. The sleeping hikers, the dream state they were in, this was communication on a level beyond words. The Waktek were showing them something, teaching them something. "I need to understand," I said, my decision made. This might be our only way out of here, our only way to help these people. Before Dawson could stop me, I placed the mushroom in my mouth and swallowed it. The taste was surprisingly mild, slightly sweet, with an earthy undertone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber began to shimmer around me, the bioluminescent patterns on the walls flowing and shifting, forming images, scenes from the past. I saw the forest as it had been thousands of years ago, pristine and untouched by human hands. I saw the Waktek living in harmony with the land, tending it, protecting it. They were not just guardians, but caretakers, with a deep connection to the forest that went beyond mere habitation. And I saw humans arrive. First, the indigenous peoples who learned to coexist with the Waktek, respecting their territory and their role. Then later arrivals, who cut down trees, built roads, drove away the wildlife, and pushed the Waktek into smaller and smaller pockets of wilderness. The images shifted to the present day, to the hikers who had ventured too close to this hidden sanctuary. They had not been taken out of malice, but out of desperation. The Waktek were showing them the truth, hoping to create ambassadors who would understand the need to protect what little remained of their world. The vision swirled faster, overwhelming me with centuries of knowledge and emotion. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the face of the female Waktek, her eyes filled with a profound sadness that transcended species. And then I was falling, spiraling into a dream state where the boundaries between human and forest, past and present, self and other, dissolved into a single unified consciousness. In that moment of connection, I understood everything. I dreamed of roots reaching deep into the earth, of leaves unfurling toward the sun, of fungi networks carrying messages between trees, an entire ecosystem communicating in ways humans had only begun to understand. And within this web of life, I sensed the Waktek, not as interlopers, but as integral parts of the forest itself, guardians, caretakers, the living memory of an ancient wilderness. Time lost all meaning as I drifted through these visions. Sometimes I was myself, observing. Other times I experienced the world through the eyes of a Waktek, feeling the soft forest floor beneath massive feet, smelling scents no human nose could detect, hearing the whispers of trees and the songs of stones. The boundary between self and other blurred until I wasn't sure where I ended and the forest began. Through it all ran a current of urgency, a desperate need to communicate, to make me understand. The Waktek were showing me their world because it was dying, squeezed by human encroachment, climate change, logging, development. This hidden valley was one of their last sanctuaries, and even it was no longer safe. The hikers had stumbled upon this place by accident, following an unmarked trail that appeared after heavy rains washed away part of the established path. They had meant no harm, but they represented a threat. More humans finding this sacred place, more intrusion, more destruction. So the Waktek had taken them, not to harm them, but to show them the truth, to turn potential enemies into allies, just as they were now trying to do with me. I became aware of a presence beside me in the dream state, Angeli, her consciousness touching mine through the neural network of fungi that connected all sleepers in the cave. She showed me her experiences, the terror of the initial encounter, the confusion of being brought to the cave, and then the gradual understanding as the visions revealed the Waktek's true nature and purpose. One by one, the other hikers joined us in this shared consciousness. James with his academic curiosity, Marie and her husband Paul with their environmentalist passion, Hiroshi with his reverence for nature, Elena with her journalist desire to document and share, and Raj with his technological mind already thinking of ways to protect this place without revealing its secrets. We were being prepared, I realized, being given knowledge and understanding that we would carry back to the human world. Not the full truth, humans weren't ready for that, but enough to ensure this valley remained protected. Gradually, the visions began to fade, the connections between our minds thinning as we drifted toward wakefulness. The last thing I saw before opening my eyes was a map of sorts, not physical but energetic, showing safe paths through the forest, ways to navigate without disturbing the hidden places, routes that would lead us home without bringing others to this sanctuary. I awoke on the moss bed, my body stiff but my mind clearer than it had ever been. Around me, the other hikers were also stirring, blinking in the bioluminescent light of the cave. Dawson and Robert sat nearby, watching us with equal parts concern and wonder. "Morgan?" Dawson moved to my side, helping me sit up. "Are you okay? You've been out for hours." "I'm fine," I assured him, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Better than fine. I understand now." "Understand what?" he asked, his face skeptical. "Everything," I said simply, knowing how inadequate the word was. "Why they're here, why they took the hikers, what they want from us." The other hikers were all awake now, huddled together and talking quietly, their faces animated not with fear but with excitement, awe, even reverence. They had experienced what I had, perhaps more, given their longer exposure to the dream fungi. "They're not monsters," said Marie, her eyes bright with wonder. "They're guardians, protectors of the forest. And they need our help," added James, the academic who had been used as a mouthpiece earlier. "Their world is shrinking, being destroyed by ours." Dawson looked between us, his expression wavering between disbelief and uncertainty. "So what? We're just supposed to forget they kidnapped you all, terrorized us, nearly got us killed?" "They didn't mean to frighten us," said Angeli softly. "They were desperate. This place, this valley, it's one of their last sanctuaries. They thought we had come to destroy it. And once they realized we weren't a threat, they tried to communicate," I added, "to show us why this place matters, why it needs to remain hidden." Robert had been silent, watching us with knowing eyes. "You've been touched by the old magic," he said quietly. "Few humans ever experience such a thing. My grandfather spoke of it once, how the elders would sometimes commune with the forest guardians through sacred rituals, but such practices were lost generations ago." A sound from the back of the cave drew our attention. The three Waktek had returned, moving with deliberate slowness as if to avoid frightening us. The largest one, the patriarch, carried something in his massive hands, our equipment neatly arranged and apparently undamaged. He approached and carefully set the items down before us. Our packs, communications gear, weapons, everything that had been taken when the hikers were brought here. It was a gesture of trust, I realized. They were releasing us, returning what was ours. The female Waktek moved forward next, extending her hand toward me. In her palm lay a small stone amulet, etched with symbols that matched the bioluminescent patterns on the cave walls. I accepted it without hesitation, feeling a subtle vibration as it touched my skin. "A token of protection," murmured Robert, who had come to look at the amulet. "A sign to other guardians that you are a friend." The young Waktek approached last, offering similar amulets to each of the hikers, who accepted them with varying degrees of reverence and awe. Even Dawson was given one, though he took it with obvious reluctance. "They're letting us go," I said, looking into the deep, intelligent eyes of the patriarch. "But they're trusting us with knowledge few humans possess. We have a responsibility now." The Waktek made a series of gestures and vocalizations that somehow, after my time in the dream state, I could partially understand. Not words exactly, but intentions, emotions, directions. They'll guide us back to the boundaries of their territory, I translated for the others. From there, we can find our way to the ranger station. What about Ellie and Marcus? Asked Dawson. We sent them east with Angeli, but... He trailed off, looking at Angeli in confusion. I never left with them, she confirmed. I've been here the whole time. A chill ran down my spine. Then who, or what, did they leave with? The patriarch Waktek made another series of gestures, and images formed in my mind. Ellie and Marcus, safely led to the edge of the forest by another guardian, one who had taken Angeli's form to ensure they would trust and follow. They were already near the ranger station, unharmed and unaware of the deception. They're safe, I assured Dawson. The Waktek made sure of it. He looked skeptical but nodded slowly. So we just... leave? Pretend none of this happened? Not pretend, corrected James. Remember, but carefully choose what we share and with whom. I understood the delicate balance we were being asked to maintain. The world wasn't ready for the full truth about the Waktek, about the ancient consciousness that dwelled in these forests. Revealing too much would bring curiosity seekers, scientists, government agents, humans who might destroy in their eagerness to understand. We tell a version of the truth, I decided. The hikers got lost after the storm washed out the trail. They sheltered in a cave until we found them. No mention of the Waktek, no details about this hidden valley. And what about what we've experienced? Asked Elena, the journalist. The shared consciousness, the visions, the knowledge. We keep it among ourselves, said Raj, the tech worker, and we use it to protect this place, these beings. One by one, everyone nodded in agreement, even Dawson, though his expression remained troubled. The Waktek seemed to sense our decision. The patriarch made a final gesture, a hand to heart, then extended outward, that needed no translation. Gratitude, connection, farewell. We gathered our equipment and prepared to leave the cave that had been both prison and classroom. As we followed the Waktek through the passages toward the surface, I couldn't help but feel we were leaving a part of ourselves behind, or perhaps carrying a part of the forest within us that hadn't been there before. The journey back was surprisingly swift. The Waktek led us along hidden paths that seemed to bend space itself, shortcuts through the wilderness that no human trail had ever marked. The mist that had confused and misdirected us now guided us, parting to reveal the way and closing behind to hide our passage. When we reached the boundary of their territory, a ridge overlooking more familiar parts of the forest, the Waktek stopped. They would go no further. This was where our worlds separated once more. The patriarch made one final series of gestures and vocalizations, which Robert translated this time. He says the forest remembers those who protect it, and those who harm it. Robert's voice was solemn. We are welcome to return, alone and with respect, but we must never lead others to their sanctuary. I touched the stone amulet around my neck, feeling its subtle warmth. Tell him we understand. Tell him we will honor our promise. Robert conveyed my words through gestures of his own, simpler than the Waktek's complex language, but sufficient. The patriarch nodded once, a surprisingly human gesture, then turned and disappeared into the mist with his family. We stood for a moment in silence, watching the place where they had vanished, already wondering if what we had experienced had been real or some collective hallucination. So, said Dawson eventually, breaking the spell, what do we tell the search teams when they ask where we've been for 3 days? 3 days, I echoed in disbelief, checking my watch. Sure enough, almost 72 hours had passed since we'd entered the hidden valley, though it had felt like both an eternity and an instant. Time moves differently in the old places, murmured Robert. Another truth the elder spoke of. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of our new responsibility. We stick to the story. The hikers got lost after the storm, took shelter in a cave. We found them yesterday and made our way back. Simple, believable, and technically true. And the amulets? Asked Marie, touching hers. Artifacts we found in the cave, probably left by indigenous peoples long ago. I hated distorting the truth, but I understood the necessity. Robert can authenticate them as Salish in origin. He nodded in agreement. I'll make sure they're respected, not taken for study or display. With our story aligned, we began the hike back to civilization. True to the Waktek's guidance, we found our way easily now, the forest no longer hiding its paths or confusing our sense of direction. Within hours, we reached a trail I recognized, and by nightfall, we were in sight of the ranger station. The reunion with search teams was emotional. We had been presumed lost ourselves after so long without contact. Ellie and Marcus were there, having made it back safely the day before with a story of their own about getting separated from us during a storm. They looked at Anjali with confusion when she appeared with our group, but a meaningful glance from me kept them from questioning it publicly. The medical team checked over the hikers, finding them dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise in surprisingly good health given their ordeal. Their survival was deemed remarkable but not impossible. Our story was accepted without much questioning. Getting lost in these woods was common enough, and the storm had indeed washed out several trails. As the debriefings and medical checks continued into the night, I slipped away for a moment of solitude on the station's back porch. The forest stretched before me, dark and mysterious under the starlight. Somewhere out there, the Waktek were watching, waiting to see if we would honor our promise. I touched the amulet around my neck, feeling its subtle vibration in tune with the living forest. "We won't forget," I whispered to the darkness. "We'll protect your secret. Your home." A distant howl echoed through the trees, not threatening now, but acknowledging. The sound of ancient beings who had walked these woods long before humans arrived and would, I hoped, continue long after we were gone. I had entered the forest as a ranger, confident in my knowledge and authority. I was leaving it as something else, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of secrets, a guardian in my own right. The wilderness would never look the same to me again, and neither would my place within it. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of Blackwater Ridge, watching the sun set over the forest that had become both more familiar and more mysterious to me since that fateful search and rescue operation. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the first hint of winter's approach, and the trees burned with the fire of changing seasons, red, gold, and amber stretching to the horizon. I came here often now, to this boundary between worlds, sometimes alone, sometimes with the others who shared the secret. We had kept our promise, telling only the agreed-upon story of getting lost and finding shelter. The incident had faded from public memory, becoming just another wilderness mishap with a fortunate ending. But for those of us who had experienced the truth, life had changed in profound ways. James, the British academic, had shifted his research focus to indigenous stories of forest guardians, documenting the commonalities in these legends across cultures without ever revealing why his interest had been sparked. His papers carefully skirted the line between academic curiosity and forbidden knowledge. Marie and Paul, the Canadian couple, had become environmental activists, fighting against logging operations that threatened old-growth forests in the region. They never mentioned the Waktek, but their passion was fueled by the understanding that they were protecting more than just trees. Hiroshi had returned to Japan, but maintained contact, sending reports of similar legends from his country's ancient forests, tales of mountain spirits and forest guardians that echoed what we had learned. Elena, true to her journalist instincts, had published a series of articles about conservation and the importance of wilderness preserves, weaving in subtle references that only we would recognize, signals to the Waktek that we had not forgotten. Raj had leveraged his position in the tech industry to develop new, non-invasive monitoring systems for forest health, technology that could help protect wilderness areas without disturbing their more elusive inhabitants. Anjali had stayed in the area, taking a position with the Forest Service as a guide. Her intimate knowledge of the forest, gained through the shared consciousness with the Waktek, made her invaluable, and she subtly steered hikers away from the hidden valley. Robert had become my closest confidant, his indigenous knowledge complementing what I had learned during our encounter. Together, we had mapped the boundaries of Waktek territory, not on paper but in our minds, and worked to establish official wilderness preserves that would protect these areas without drawing attention to why they mattered. Dawson had struggled the most with what we had experienced. He had transferred to a different district shortly after our return, claiming he needed a change of scenery. But I occasionally received emails from him, cryptic messages that suggested he was still processing what had happened, still trying to reconcile it with his view of the world. As for me, I had been forever changed by the connection I had felt in that cave, the dissolution of boundaries between self and forest, human and other. The amulet never left my neck, a constant reminder of the responsibility I had accepted. I came to the ridge regularly, watching and listening. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement in the deep forest, a flash of reddish-brown hair, the silhouette of a figure too tall and broad to be human. Sometimes I heard vocalizations carried on the wind, that strange, rhythmic language that I could now partially understand. The Waktek were still there, still watching, still protecting their diminishing realm, and I was watching over them in return, using my position as a ranger to redirect trails, discourage development, and preserve the mystery of their existence. I had brought my journal with me this evening, as I often did, to record my thoughts and observations. Writing helped me process the experience, though I knew these pages would never be shared. They were my personal record to be destroyed before my death, rather than risk someone discovering the truth. As I sat on a fallen log, looking out over the vast expanse of wilderness, I sensed rather than heard someone approach. Turning, I saw Robert making his way up the trail, his aging face creased with concern. "I thought I might find you here," he said, settling beside me on the log. "You heard the news?" I nodded grimly. "The logging permits for the north section. I've been fighting them for months, but the company has political connections. The proposed logging operation wouldn't directly impact the Hidden Valley, but it would come dangerously close to the boundaries of Waktek territory. And worse, it would bring machinery, workers, and roads into an area that had remained largely untouched. The tribal council is filing an injunction," Robert said, "claiming the area has cultural significance. It might buy us some time, but not enough," I finished for him. "They'll want evidence, documentation of why the area matters. Things we can't provide without revealing what we're really protecting." We sat in troubled silence, watching the sun sink lower. The shadows lengthened across the valley, and with the gathering darkness came a sense of foreboding. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting our solution to this new threat. "There might be another way," Robert said finally, his voice low. "The dream fungi. If we could somehow get the key decision-makers to experience what we did." I shook my head. "Too risky. And the Waktek would never agree to reveal themselves like that. They showed us their world because they had no choice. We had already stumbled upon their secret." "Then what do we do?" he asked, the frustration evident in his voice. "Stand by and watch as another piece of their world is destroyed?" Before I could answer, a sound echoed through the trees, that distinctive vocalization that wasn't quite speech, but carried meaning nonetheless. We both froze, listening intently. "They're calling us," I realized, standing and peering into the gathering darkness. "They know." Robert nodded, also rising. "They've always known more than we give them credit for. The forest is their nervous system, carrying information we can't perceive." The call came again, more insistent this time. Without discussion, we gathered our things and headed down the trail that led deeper into the forest. As we walked, the familiar mist began to gather around us, not impeding our progress but enveloping us like a cloak, hiding us from any other humans who might be in the area. The path seemed to shift and change as we walked, just as it had a year ago. What should have been a journey of many hours took only one, the forest bending space to bring us more quickly to our destination. We emerged into a clearing I hadn't seen before, a perfect circle of ancient trees surrounding a small meadow where moonlight illuminated a gathering of Waktek. There were more than I had seen previously, perhaps a dozen in total, of varying ages and sizes. They stood in a semicircle watching our approach with those deeply intelligent eyes. The patriarch stepped forward, his massive form now familiar rather than frightening. He made a series of gestures and vocalizations that I understood better than I had a year ago. My mind had continued to process and interpret their language during dreams and quiet moments of contemplation. "They know about the logging operation," I translated for Robert, though his own understanding had also grown. "They've called a council to decide what to do." The female Waktek, who I now thought of as the matriarch, approached next. She carried something in her hands, a wooden bowl containing several of the glowing mushrooms we had experienced before. They want us to join the council, I realized, to share in their consciousness again, to find a solution together. Robert and I exchanged glances. This was an unprecedented honor, an invitation to participate in the Waktek's decision-making process as equals rather than outsiders. "We accept," I said, using both words and the gestural language I had been practicing. The matriarch's eyes crinkled in what I now recognized as their version of a smile. She offered the bowl first to Robert, who took one of the mushrooms with reverence, and then to me. This time, I knew what to expect as I consumed the fungi. The transition was smoother, my mind more prepared for the dissolution of boundaries that followed. I felt myself expanding, connecting, first with Robert, then with each of the Waktek in turn, and finally with the forest itself, that vast, ancient consciousness that underlay everything. Within this shared mind space, communication was direct and profound. I understood the Waktek's fear of the encroaching logging operation, their helplessness in the face of human industry. They had been retreating for centuries, giving ground as humans expanded, but they were running out of places to go. This hidden valley and the surrounding wilderness were among their last strongholds. I shared my own frustration, the limitations of human law and politics, the difficulty of protecting something whose existence couldn't be acknowledged. Robert added his perspective, the long history of his people living alongside the Waktek, the broken promises and lost knowledge, as colonization had severed those ancient connections. And then, something unexpected happened. Other minds joined our communion: James, Marie, Paul, Hiroshi, Elena, Raj, Anjali, even the reluctant consciousness of Dawson. Though physically distant, they were connected through the amulets they wore, drawn into this mental council by the urgency of the situation. Together, our combined knowledge and perspectives began to form a solution, not a perfect one, but a path forward. Elena, with her media connections, could bring attention to the unique ecological features of the area without mentioning the Waktek. Raj could deploy his new monitoring technology to document rare species that would warrant protection. James could provide academic support through his research into indigenous land management practices. Marie and Paul could mobilize environmental activists. Anjali and I could use our positions within the Forest Service to advocate from within. And Dawson, surprisingly, offered the most crucial piece. His new position gave him access to historical land surveys that might reveal discrepancies, errors that could be used to challenge the logging permits on technical grounds. The Waktek absorbed our plan, adding their own element. They would temporarily relocate their young and vulnerable members deeper into the hidden valley, while the stronger adults would remain to monitor the situation, ready to create distractions or minor equipment failures if human activity came too close to revealing their existence. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning, a collaborative effort between two species to protect a shared home. As the vision began to fade and our individual consciousnesses reasserted themselves, I felt a profound sense of purpose solidify within me. This was why I had become a ranger, not just to protect the wilderness for human enjoyment, but to preserve it for all the beings who called it home, whether acknowledged by human society or not. I came back to myself sitting in the moonlit clearing, surrounded by the Waktek and with Robert beside me. The others were not physically present, but I knew they had shared in the communion, would remember it upon waking, and would understand their roles in what was to come. The patriarch approached me once more, extending one massive hand. In it lay a new amulet, different from the one I already wore. Larger, more intricately carved, glowing faintly with an inner light that matched the bioluminescent fungi in the cave. "An elder's token," translated Robert, his voice hushed with awe. "They're making you a recognized guardian of their realm. Such an honor has not been granted to a human in generations." I accepted the amulet with hands that trembled slightly, understanding the weight of responsibility it represented. The patriarch then presented a similar amulet to Robert, acknowledging his role as both bridge and keeper of ancient knowledge. With these final gifts, the council concluded. The Waktek began to disperse, melting into the forest with that uncanny grace that belied their size. The patriarch and matriarch remained longest, watching us with eyes that held both wisdom and worry. Then they too were gone, leaving us alone in the moonlit clearing. "Do you think it will work?" asked Robert as we began our journey back. Our plan? I don't know, I admitted, but it's better than doing nothing. And we're not alone anymore, not just the two of us trying to keep an impossible secret. The mist guided us once more, leading us back to the familiar trails more quickly than should have been possible. As we neared the boundary of Waktek territory, I paused, looking back at the dark forest that concealed so many wonders and secrets. They've been here for thousands of years, I said softly, watching, waiting, adapting. They've survived ice ages, natural disasters, the arrival of humans. They'll find a way to survive this too. With our help, added Robert. With our help, I agreed. We emerged from the forest as dawn was breaking, the first light illuminating the ranger station in the distance. Already, I could see activity, vehicles arriving, preparations for the day's work beginning. Among them would be those who sought to exploit the forest and those who sought to protect it, most unaware of what truly dwelled in its depths. I touched the new amulet nestled beside the original one around my neck, feeling the connection it represented, not just to the Waktek, but to the forest itself, to something ancient and enduring that transcended the boundaries between species. The battle to protect their home would be challenging, fought in courtrooms and corporate boardrooms, as well as in the wilderness itself. We might win this round only to face new threats in the future. But we would face them together, humans and Waktek, visible protectors and hidden guardians, united by a shared understanding that some places must remain wild, some mysteries unsolved. As we walked toward the ranger station and the day's work ahead, a distant howl echoed through the trees, not a sound of threat or warning now, but a reminder, a promise. The forest remembers those who protect it, and so would I. I never believed in evil, not the kind that lurks in shadows, watching and waiting. After 15 years as a park ranger in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, I had seen nature's brutality, flash floods sweeping away campers, lightning strikes leaving charred remains, even the occasional mountain lion attack. But nature isn't malevolent. It simply exists, indifferent to human life. That changed 3 months ago when I took the position at Say Nawahi Wilderness Outpost. The job listing described a remote ranger station nestled in a forgotten corner of the forest, far from the tourist trails and weekend campers. The previous ranger had left suddenly, citing personal reasons. The Forest Service was desperate for someone with experience who could handle extended isolation. The pay was excellent, and after my divorce, I needed the space to rebuild myself. It's not for everyone, my supervisor said during the interview. Nearest town is White River, about 40 miles of rough road. You'll be completely self-sufficient. Solar power, satellite phone for emergencies only. There's a natural spring for water and a small lake for fishing. The cabin's well stocked. Why'd the last guy leave? I asked. A pause. Said he couldn't handle the solitude. I should have noticed how he avoided my eyes. The drive to the outpost took nearly 2 hours from the main highway, the last 20 miles on a fire road so rarely used that pine saplings grew between the tire tracks. The forest grew denser as I climbed higher into the mountains, the late afternoon sunlight barely penetrating the canopy. The GPS signal faded in and out, but I had memorized the directions. When I finally reached the clearing, I was struck by the beauty of the place. The cabin sat on a small rise overlooking a glassy lake ringed by towering ponderosa pines. Behind it, the land rose steeply toward a ridgeline of weathered granite. The cabin itself was larger than I expected, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that had likely stood for half a century or more. I parked beside the weathered Forest Service truck left for my use and stepped out into the crisp mountain air. A breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Perfect silence followed, no traffic, no human voices, not even the distant hum of civilization. Just the occasional call of a bird and the soft lapping of water at the lake's edge. Home. I spent that first day unpacking and exploring the cabin. 2 bedrooms, a surprisingly well-equipped kitchen, a living area with a stone fireplace, and an office with maps and logbooks dating back decades. Solar panels on the roof fed batteries in a shed out back. A hand pump drew water from the spring. Simple, functional, isolated. In the office, I found the logs from the previous ranger, a man named Daniel Martinez. His entries started normally enough: weather conditions, wildlife sightings, the occasional lost hiker escorted back to civilization. But the tone changed about 6 months in. His handwriting grew erratic, his notes shorter and more cryptic. Sounds again last night, not coyotes. Tracks at the east shore, too large for bear, stride all wrong. Something watching the cabin, can feel it. His final entry dated just 3 weeks before my arrival. It's trying to get in, not leaving my name for it. They wouldn't believe me anyway. I closed the logbook, attributing his paranoia to the isolation. Some people aren't cut out for this life. I've always been comfortable with solitude, with silence. I told myself I was different. That first night I built a fire in the hearth and sat with a glass of whiskey, listening to the crackling flames and the soft sounds of the forest settling into darkness. Through the windows I could see the perfect reflection of the moon on the lake's surface. As I was about to turn in, a sound cut through the night, a long, undulating howl that was neither wolf nor coyote. It started low, then climbed to a pitch that raised the hair on my arms, before dissolving into something like human laughter. I told myself it was just an animal I hadn't encountered before. The mountains played tricks with sound. I finished my drink and went to bed. That night, I dreamed of running through the forest, pursued by something I couldn't see. I could hear it moving behind me, its footfalls heavy, yet quick. In the dream, I knew that if I turned to look, I would die. So I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I woke drenched in sweat, the first light of dawn seeping through the curtains. As I made coffee, I glanced out the kitchen window toward the lake. A figure stood at the water's edge. Even at this distance, I could tell it wasn't human. Not entirely. It stood on 2 legs but was hunched forward, its proportions wrong. Though it was perfectly still, there was something in its posture that suggested it could explode into motion at any moment. I grabbed my binoculars for a better look, but when I raised them to my eyes, the shore was empty. After breakfast, I hiked down to the lake. The ground where the figure had stood was marked with tracks unlike any I'd seen in 15 years of forestry work. They resembled large human footprints, but with elongated toes ending in what appeared to be claw marks. They led from the water's edge into the forest, where they disappeared among the undergrowth. I took photos and measurements, telling myself there must be a rational explanation. Perhaps a bear with deformed paws, or maybe someone playing an elaborate prank on the new ranger. But deep down, I knew better. The isolation of the place pressed in on me, and for the first time I questioned the wisdom of coming here alone. That afternoon I heard a tapping at my door. 3 distinct knocks, deliberate and patient. When I opened it, the porch was empty. But there on the top step lay a small bundle of twigs bound with what looked like human hair. I left it there, untouched. As darkness fell, I loaded my shotgun and kept it close. The howl came again that night, closer to the cabin. And with it, soft footsteps circling the building, pausing occasionally as if listening for movement inside. In the logbook that night, I wrote only, "Something is here with me. It knows I've arrived." I didn't know it then, but I had already been marked. The thing in the forest, the Navajo call it Yi Naldlushi, the skinwalker, had found its new prey, and the game had only just begun. The following days brought a deceptive calm. I established my routine: morning inspections of the immediate area, radio check-ins with headquarters when the signal allowed, afternoon patrols of the surrounding trails, and evenings documenting the day's observations. The strange tracks didn't reappear, and the nighttime visitations ceased. I began to wonder if the isolation had already affected my perception, making me imagine threats where there were none. On my 5th day, I decided to explore farther afield. The maps showed an old Apache trail that wound through the forest to a series of high meadows about 4 miles north of the cabin. According to the notes, it had once been a sacred site where medicine men conducted ceremonies, but few people visited it now. The trail was overgrown in places but still visible, climbing steadily through stands of ancient ponderosas and clusters of aspen whose leaves trembled in the slightest breeze. The day was perfect. Clear blue sky, temperature in the mid-60s, a light wind carrying the scent of pine resin and wildflowers. For the first time since arriving, I felt at peace. The meadow, when I reached it, took my breath away. A vast expanse of grass and wildflowers surrounded by a natural amphitheater of rocky slopes. At the far end, a small waterfall spilled into a crystal-clear pool. The place had a presence, a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the land itself was watching. I sat on a boulder near the pool to eat my lunch. The only sounds were the gentle splash of the waterfall and the occasional buzz of an insect. Perfect solitude. Then I noticed the stone circle. About 20 yards away, partially hidden by tall grass, a ring of stones had been arranged with obvious care. Each stone was roughly the size of a human head, positioned precisely to form a perfect circle about 8 feet in diameter. In the center stood a single larger stone, oddly shaped, almost like a crude human figure. I approached carefully. The arrangement was clearly man-made, but it didn't look recent. Lichen covered parts of the stones, and grass had grown up between them. Yet something about it felt wrong, disturbed somehow, as if someone had recently adjusted the stones without fully covering their tracks. As I knelt to examine one of the boundary stones, I noticed strange markings carved into its surface. Symbols I didn't recognize, worn by time, but still visible. They reminded me of the pictographs left by ancient peoples throughout the Southwest, but these seemed different, more angular, more deliberate. A sudden gust of wind swept through the meadow, bringing with it a scent that didn't belong, something metallic and rotten, like old blood and decay. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Though I could see nothing unusual, I felt watched, studied, by something hostile. I backed away from the stone circle, fighting the urge to run. The tranquility of the meadow had vanished, replaced by a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Even the sounds seemed muted, as if the place were holding its breath. On the return journey, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Several times I stopped to listen, hearing nothing but the forest sounds that should have reassured me but somehow didn't. Twice I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape ducking behind trees, but when I turned, nothing was there. The shadows lengthened as the sun began to set, and I quickened my pace. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in these woods after dark. About a mile from the cabin, I found something on the trail that stopped me cold. My boot print from earlier in the day was still visible in a patch of soft soil, but overlapping it was another print, the same elongated, claw-tipped impression I'd seen at the lake. It hadn't been there on my outward journey. Whatever made it had been following me, stepping exactly where I had stepped. I broke into a run then, all pretense of professional calm abandoned. I didn't stop until I reached the cabin, slamming and locking the door behind me. That night I pored over the old ranger logs again, searching for mentions of the stone circle or similar encounters. Most entries were mundane, but scattered throughout were veiled references to disturbances and incidents that were never fully explained. Then I found it, a loose sheet tucked between pages of a logbook from the 1970s. It was a transcript of an interview with a White Mountain Apache elder, conducted by a ranger named Thomas Blackwood. "The place you call Tse-na-Wahi," the elder was quoted as saying, "has always been forbidden to our people. The name itself is a warning. It means the crawling rock in your language, but that misses the true meaning. It is a place where the boundary between worlds thins, where things can cross over that should remain separate." The elder spoke of ancient ceremonies performed there, not to worship, but to contain something. And he mentioned beings that could wear the skins of animals or humans walking among us. "If you see tracks that change," he warned, "if you hear your name called in the forest by a voice you almost recognize, if you find gifts of bone or hair left for you, these are signs. It has chosen you. The skinwalker won't stop until it has taken what it wants." The last paragraph chilled me. Ranger Blackwood asked what the skinwalker wants. The elder would not answer directly, but said, "It hungers for more than flesh. It wants to wear your life." The interview ended abruptly, with a note from Blackwood. Subject became agitated and refused to continue. Recommend avoiding discussion of local superstitions with tribal elders in the future. I set the paper down with shaking hands. Outside, the night had grown completely silent. No insects chirping, no owls calling, no rustling of nocturnal animals. Just absolute stillness. Then came the voice, so close to the window that it might have been inside the room. "Ranger?" The word was drawn out, almost playful, in a voice that was both familiar and wrong, like hearing your own voice on a recording but distorted. "I know you're listening. I've been waiting for you." I sat frozen, unable to move, as a shadow passed across the window, too tall and misshapen to be human. "We have so much to share," the voice continued, now moving around to another window. "Your predecessor didn't want to play, but you will. I can tell you're different." The doorknob rattled, gently at first, then with increasing force. "Let me in, Ranger. It's cold out here." My shotgun lay across the table. I grabbed it and chambered around, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. The rattling stopped immediately. A soft laugh drifted through the door, followed by words that made my blood freeze. "Not yet then, but soon. You'll open the door yourself before the end. They always do." Silence fell again. I sat motionless for hours, gun trained on the door, listening for any sound of movement outside. Nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I must have dozed off. I woke at dawn to find the cabin undisturbed. But on the porch, stretched out like an offering, was the carcass of a small deer. Its body had been split open with surgical precision, organs removed, the cavity washed clean. Its eyes were missing, and in their place were 2 small stones from the circle I'd found in the meadow. I knew then that I was being hunted by something that didn't just want to kill me. It wanted to break me first, and it was patient. The deer carcass was my breaking point. I radioed headquarters, fighting for a clear signal through the mountains. "Request immediate extraction," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's someone or something threatening me at the outpost." Static crackled for several seconds before a response came through. "Say again, Senawahi Station? You're breaking up." I repeated my message, adding details about the tracks, the voice, and the mutilated deer. More static then. "Ranger, we're getting portions of your transmission. Weather system moving in is causing interference. Did you report wildlife activity near the station?" "Not wildlife," I insisted. "Listen to me. There's something out here, something dangerous. I need—" The radio died completely, the battery indicator flashing red despite having been charged the previous day. I tried the satellite phone with the same result, dead, though it had been fully charged. I was alone. I considered hiking out, but the nearest road was miles away, and I didn't trust my ability to navigate the challenging terrain if whatever was stalking me decided to attack. The Forest Service vehicle was my best option, assuming it would start. To my immense relief, the truck's engine roared to life. I threw my essential gear into the cab and prepared to leave, not caring about protocol or proper checkout procedures. As I shifted into reverse, the engine sputtered and died. I tried the ignition again. Nothing, not even a click. Opening the hood revealed the problem. The wiring had been torn apart, not chewed by animals or worn by time, but deliberately ripped out by something with enormous strength. Transmission fluid pooled beneath the vehicle where the line had been severed. I was trapped. Back in the cabin, I barricaded the doors and windows as best I could. I inventoried my supplies. Enough food for 3 weeks if I rationed carefully, plenty of water from the spring, ammunition for the shotgun and my service pistol, a first aid kit, and basic tools. I could survive until someone came to check on me, which would happen eventually, though it might be weeks. As I finished securing the cabin, thunder rumbled in the distance. The clear sky of morning had given way to dark storm clouds rolling in from the west. The forecasts hadn't mentioned a storm, but mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable. The rain began as fat, heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by deafening thunder that seemed to shake the cabin's foundations. Through the curtain of rain, the lake's surface churned with whitecaps. Something caught my eye, a disturbance in the water near the center of the lake. At first I thought it might be a fish jumping, but it was too large. Then I saw it again, something breaking the surface. I grabbed my binoculars and peered through the rain-streaked window. What I saw made no sense. A shape rose from the water, Humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements fluid yet somehow mechanical. It seemed to be pulling something from the lake's depths. I watched, transfixed with horror, as the figure dragged what appeared to be a body onto the shore, something pale and limp. It hunched over its prize, and though the rain obscured the details, the movements suggested it was feeding. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene with stark clarity for just an instant. The thing at the shoreline looked up directly at my window, its face a nightmare of wrong angles and too many features, eyes reflecting the lightning like an animal's. It saw me watching. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the cabin with unnatural force. The wind howled through the trees, carrying sounds that might have been screams. I kept the lights off, moving through the cabin only when necessary, always staying away from the windows. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. Water began to seep under the door despite my efforts to block it. The temperature dropped dramatically, my breath fogging in the increasingly cold air. Around midnight, the rain suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No dripping water, no wind in the trees, nothing. I peered out the window toward the lake. The water glowed. A soft, pulsing blue light emanated from beneath the surface, illuminating the entire lake from within. The effect was beautiful, but terribly wrong, like bioluminescent algae, but more deliberate, more intelligent. Against all better judgment, I felt drawn to it. The glow seemed to call to me, promising answers, promising safety. Before I realized what I was doing, I had unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch. The night air hit me like a physical blow, shockingly cold and damp. It broke whatever spell had momentarily taken hold of me. I retreated back inside, disturbed by how easily I had been influenced. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back to the wall, guns within reach, watching the hypnotic pulsing of the light through the window. Occasionally, shadows moved across the glow, large shapes swimming beneath the surface that shouldn't have been there. The lake wasn't deep enough or large enough to harbor anything substantial. Yet something was down there. Many somethings. Dawn brought gray skies, but no rain. The lake had returned to normal. No glow, no movement, just still water reflecting the cloudy sky. I might have convinced myself I'd imagined it all if not for the tracks on the shore. Dozens of them, leading from the water's edge into the forest. I needed to understand what I was facing. The ranger logs and that single interview transcript weren't enough. If I was dealing with a skinwalker, I needed to know its weaknesses, how to fight it, or at least keep it at bay. The cabin's bookshelf held the usual Forest Service manuals and wildlife guides, but behind them, I discovered a hidden compartment built into the wall. Inside was a small wooden box, its lid carved with symbols similar to those I'd seen on the stones in the meadow. The box contained several items: a leather-bound journal much older than the ranger logs, a small cloth pouch filled with what looked like herbs and mineral fragments, and a knife with a bone handle inscribed with intricate designs. The journal belonged to someone named William Hathorne, who identified himself as both a government surveyor and an amateur ethnologist studying Apache and Navajo beliefs in the 1890s. His handwriting was precise, his observations detailed and largely scientific, until he was assigned to map the region around what would later become the Tse-Nawahi outpost. Hathorne wrote of finding the stone circle, which was much more elaborate then, and of encounters with local medicine men who warned him away from the area. Like many educated men of his time, he initially dismissed their concerns as superstition. But as his survey work continued, strange events began to occur. He described finding animal carcasses arranged in patterns around his camp, hearing voices calling his name in the night, seeing tracks that changed form mid-stride. His entries grew increasingly distressed as he realized something was hunting him. The final pages detailed his desperate attempts to protect himself using knowledge gleaned from reluctant tribal sources. The pouch contained materials for a protective mixture to be scattered around dwellings. The knife, he claimed, was the only weapon that could harm the skinwalker, provided it was coated with white ash. His last entry was a frantic scrawl: "It wears my face now. God help anyone who encounters it." The journal ended there. I had no way of knowing if Hathorne had survived or if his protective measures had worked, but it was more information than I had before. Following his instructions, I prepared the mixture from the pouch, herbs, minerals, and what appeared to be dried blood, and scattered it around the cabin's perimeter. I built a fire in the hearth and collected the white ash, coating the bone knife as Hathorn had described. That night, as darkness fell, I heard it again, that not quite human howl. But now it seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if I were surrounded. The voices that followed spoke in a language I didn't understand, their tones mocking. Something heavy landed on the roof, moving with deliberate steps toward the chimney. I stared at the fireplace, shotgun aimed, as soot and debris scattered onto the dying embers. A voice called down from above, using my name, my full name, which I hadn't told anyone here. It spoke with the voice of my ex-wife, asking why I had left, why I had abandoned her when she needed me. Then it changed, becoming my father's voice, speaking of disappointment and failure. Then a child's voice pleading for help. I covered my ears, but the voices continued, now seeming to come from inside my own head. They knew everything, every fear, every regret, every shame. They pulled apart my psyche with surgical precision, finding the weak points, the vulnerabilities. "Stop!" I shouted, firing the shotgun into the fireplace in blind panic. Silence fell immediately, then soft laughter from outside the window. "You cannot keep us out forever, Ranger," said a voice that was a composite of all the others. "The boundary weakens. Soon we will wear your skin and walk in your world, as we have done before, as we will do again." The night passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. By morning, I was no longer certain which experiences were real and which were hallucinations born of sleep deprivation and terror. But one thing was clear: I needed to understand the lake. Whatever presence haunted this place, the lake seemed to be its center, its power source. Hathorn's journal mentioned it repeatedly, calling it the thin place and the doorway. I had to see what was beneath those waters, and I had to do it before nightfall. Dawn arrived with an unnatural mist clinging to the ground, so thick I could barely see the lake from the cabin porch. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, and carried a metallic taste that coated my tongue. Something fundamental had changed overnight. The boundary between worlds that the Apache elder had mentioned was growing thinner. I gathered my equipment, the bone knife coated with ash, my service pistol, a waterproof flashlight, and a makeshift protective charm I'd assembled following Hathorn's instructions, a small leather pouch containing ash, salt, and herbs, tied with strands of my own hair. According to the journal, it would mask my presence from the skinwalker, at least temporarily. The path to the lake seemed longer than usual, the familiar landscape distorted by mist. Sounds were muffled, and occasionally a breeze would create shapes in the fog that almost resembled figures watching from the trees. I kept my hand on my pistol, eyes constantly scanning for movement. At the lake's edge, the water was perfectly still despite the breeze, as if it were a sheet of glass. My reflection stared back at me, but something about it was wrong. The movement slightly delayed, the expression not quite matching my own. I looked away quickly. Hathorn's journal had mentioned unusual depths in certain parts of the lake, far deeper than should be possible given the lake's size and location. He'd marked a spot on his hand-drawn map where the bottom seemed to drop away into nothingness. That was where I needed to look. I'd brought simple diving gear, a mask and snorkel. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't wait for proper equipment. Whatever was happening was accelerating, and I sensed that time was running out. The water was shockingly cold as I waded in, numbing my legs almost immediately. The lake bottom was firm near the shore but quickly gave way to soft silt that clouded with each step. About 20 yards out, where Hathorn's map indicated the unusual depth, I took a deep breath and dove. The water clarity was surprising. I could see a good distance despite the disturbance I'd caused entering. The bottom sloped gently at first, then dropped away sharply, just as the journal had described. I kicked deeper, following the underwater cliff face. What I found defied explanation. Embedded in the rock wall were structures, not natural formations but clearly artificial constructions that resembled doorways. They were built from a black stone unlike any in the surrounding geology, their surfaces carved with the same symbols I'd seen on the stones in the meadow. Each doorway was sealed with what appeared to be a thin membrane that undulated slightly in the water currents, like skin stretched over a frame. As I watched, one of the membranes bulged outward, as if something on the other side was pressing against it. My lungs burned for air. but I was transfixed by the impossible sight. I moved closer, reaching out to touch the nearest membrane with the tip of the bone knife. The membrane parted like water around the blade, revealing utter darkness beyond. Not the darkness of an unlit cave, but a complete absence of light that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. Something moved in that darkness, a suggestion of forms shifting and sliding against each other. A hand shot out from the darkness, gray-skinned, elongated, with too many joints in the fingers. It grasped at me, missing by inches as I kicked backward in panic. I shot toward the surface, lungs screaming, heart pounding. As I broke into air, gasping, I heard it. That same howling call, but now coming from beneath the water. I swam frantically for shore, expecting at any moment to feel something grab my legs and pull me under. When my feet found purchase on the bottom, I half ran, half stumbled onto land, collapsing on the pebbly beach. Looking back at the lake, I saw ripples spreading outward from where I'd been. But they were moving against the wind, against the natural current. Something was rising. I didn't wait to see what emerged. I ran for the cabin, slipping on wet stones, crashing through underbrush, my soaked clothes heavy and cold against my skin. Inside, I barricaded the door and fell into a chair, shivering uncontrollably. What I'd seen couldn't exist. Not in any world I understood. Yet I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. The lake contained doorways to somewhere else, and something was coming through. As daylight faded, I frantically reviewed Hathorne's journal, searching for anything that might help me understand what I'd seen. His later entries mentioned the crossing places and the doors beneath, but provided little concrete information, as if he'd been afraid to commit his full knowledge to paper. One passage stood out. The Apaches say the boundary must be maintained. The circle of stones is a lock, the lake a door. If the lock fails, the door opens. If the door opens fully, what comes through will never leave. I thought about the stone circle in the meadow, how it had seemed disturbed, as if someone had interfered with its arrangement. Had that weakened whatever protection it provided? Was that why the skinwalker and whatever else lurked here seemed more active now? As night fell completely, the temperature in the cabin plummeted. My breath fogged in the air and frost began to form on the inside of the windows despite the fire I'd built in the hearth. The flames themselves burned oddly, giving off little heat and casting strange, shifting shadows that didn't match the objects in the room. A soft tapping came at the window, gentle, almost polite. When I didn't respond, it moved to the door, then to another window, circling the cabin methodically. "We see you, Ranger," came a chorus of voices, speaking in perfect unison. "We know what you saw beneath the water. The doors are opening. Will you not welcome us?" I remained silent, clutching the bone knife. "Your kind has kept us out for so long," the voices continued. "The first guardians, with their stone circles and blood sacrifices. Then the men of paper and ink, with their maps and boundaries. And now you, the last guardian, though you don't even know what you guard." The tapping stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear something large moving on the roof. Not the careful steps of before, but a heavy dragging sound, as if something enormous was pulling itself across the shingles. A deafening impact shook the cabin as something struck the roof with tremendous force. Dust and splinters rained down from the ceiling. Another blow followed, and another, each one stronger than the last. The roof began to crack. I grabbed my shotgun and fired upward, the blast deafening in the confined space. The assault paused momentarily, then resumed with increased fury. Whatever was up there, bullets wouldn't stop it. I remembered Hathorne's writings about the stone circle being a lock. If it had been damaged or altered, perhaps restoring it would strengthen the boundary again. It was a desperate theory, but I had nothing else. The roof wouldn't hold much longer. I had to try. Gathering everything I might need, the bone knife, my pistol, a flashlight, Hathorne's journal, and the protective pouch, I prepared to make a run for the meadow. The stone circle was miles away, through dark forest, with unknown entities hunting me. The chances of success seemed vanishingly small. As if sensing my plan, the assault on the roof stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear multiple entities surrounding the cabin, their breathing ragged and wet. "There is nowhere to run, Ranger," the voices said. "The boundary falls tonight, but you need not perish. Join us. Wear our skin as we will wear yours. Become something greater." As they spoke, a strange lethargy crept over me, a desire to stop fighting, to open the door and embrace whatever waited outside. The sensation was similar to what I'd felt when the lake glowed, but stronger, more insidious. With tremendous effort, I forced myself to focus on memories of my life before this place, my family, friends, the mundane world where lakes didn't have doorways to other dimensions, and voices didn't call from the darkness. That world was real. This nightmare could not be. The lethargy receded slightly. Outside, something snarled in frustration. I had one chance. Moving to the back of the cabin, where the forest came closest to the building, I eased open a window. The night air rushed in, carrying that same metallic scent, stronger now. I heard movement as the entities detected the opening, but I was already slipping through, dropping to the ground outside. Without looking back, I sprinted for the tree line, using the flashlight only when absolutely necessary to avoid roots and obstacles. Behind me, inhuman howls rose in chorus. The hunt was on. I ran blindly, pushing myself beyond exhaustion, driven by pure survival instinct. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept moving, changing direction frequently in hopes of confusing my pursuers. Their calls echoed through the forest, sometimes seeming to come from ahead of me rather than behind. They were trying to herd me, I realized, driving me in a specific direction, not toward the meadow, but back toward the lake. I veered sharply away from the path they were steering me toward, fighting through dense underbrush. The calls behind me took on a frustrated tone. Hours passed in a nightmarish blur of running, hiding, listening, then running again when the sounds of pursuit grew too close. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to give out, but I forced myself onward. Eventually, the trees began to thin. I'd reached the edge of the meadow. In the moonlight, the stone circle was clearly visible, and so was the figure standing within it. It had my face, not exactly my face. The proportions were wrong, the features slightly distorted, as if someone had tried to create a mask based on a blurry photograph. But the resemblance was close enough to send a chill through me. It smiled when it saw me, the expression stretching too wide for a human face. "Guardian," it said in my voice, "you've come to witness the opening. How fitting." I raised my pistol, but the creature only laughed, a sound that started human but descended into something else entirely. "Your weapons cannot harm me here, between the worlds," it said. "I am not yet fully in your reality, nor am I bound by its rules." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse from exertion and fear. "I am what waits beyond every boundary," it replied. "I am what humans have always feared in the darkness. In your arrogance, you name us, Wendigo, Skinwalker, Vampire, Demon, as if names could contain us. We are older than your words, older than your species, and soon we will walk your world again, as we did before your ancestors drove us back." It gestured to the stone circle. I could see now that several of the stones had been moved, breaking the perfect circle. The larger stone in the center had been tipped onto its side. "The lock," I said, understanding. "Yes," it confirmed. "Weakened over centuries, damaged by those who didn't understand its purpose, and now, broken by my hand. Why show yourself to me? Why not just open your door and be done with it?" The thing wearing my face tilted its head, the movement too fluid, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. "Because the final key is you, Guardian. The boundary requires blood to open fully, the blood of the one who watches over this place. Your predecessor refused us. He fled rather than face his duty. But you came back. You sought understanding. You are worthy." It stepped toward me, movements jerky, yet graceful, like an insect pretending to be human. "Join us willingly, and the crossing will be painless. Resist, and we will take what we need regardless." I knew with absolute certainty that if this thing took my blood, willingly given or forcibly taken, something terrible would be unleashed, not just here, but everywhere. The doors beneath would open fully, and what waited on the other side would pour into our world. I had one chance: restore the circle before the entity could stop me. The bone knife might not kill it, but Hathorn's journal suggested it could at least harm or repel the creature temporarily. As if reading my thoughts, the Skinwalker's smile widened further, splitting its face in a way no human mouth could. "The circle cannot be restored," it said. "The binding is broken. The time of boundaries is ending. But even as it spoke, I noticed something. Its feet could not or would not cross the line where the circle had been. Despite its claims, it remained within the broken boundary. There was still hope. What followed was a desperate struggle, me attempting to reset the stones while avoiding the creature's increasingly frantic attacks. It couldn't leave the circle, but its limbs could extend beyond it, stretching impossibly to swipe at me with claws that hadn't been visible before. Each stone I managed to move back into position seemed to cause it physical pain. It howled and thrashed, its form becoming less human with each passing moment, my stolen face melting into something ancient and terrible. In the distance, more howls answered. The others were coming. I had minutes at most. With the last of my strength, I heaved the center stone back into its upright position. The effect was immediate, a pulse of energy that knocked me backward. The skinwalker screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, as invisible forces seemed to constrict around it. "You cannot stop what is coming," it snarled, its voice no longer mine but a chorus of dozens. "The lake still opens. The boundary still thins. We are Legion, and you are one." "Then I'll be the one who stands against Legion," I replied, drawing the bone knife. What happened next was both triumph and tragedy. The restored circle held the skinwalker, weakening it enough that my knife found its mark. The creature dissolved into a noxious mist that dissipated in the night air. But as it died, it spoke one final truth. The lake was still opening. The circle was only one lock. The cabin itself was another. And both had been compromised. As dawn broke over the meadow, I knew what I had to do. The cabin contained the final boundary, the last defense against whatever waited beneath the lake. If I couldn't restore it, I had to destroy it completely, sealing whatever doorway it protected. I ran back through the forest as morning light filtered through the trees. The howls had stopped, but I could feel presences moving alongside me, just out of sight, watching, waiting. When I reached the cabin, I found it transformed. The simple structure I'd lived in was now something else. Its angles wrong, its dimensions impossible, as if parts of it existed in spaces I couldn't perceive. The wood of its walls seemed to pulse like living tissue. Inside would be the final confrontation, me against whatever had been trying to break through from the beginning. I had no illusions about my chances of survival. But sometimes, the only victory possible is ensuring your enemy doesn't win either. I entered the cabin for the last time, bone knife in hand, a desperate plan forming. If I couldn't close the door, I would burn down the house that contained it. And as I crossed the threshold, the world around me shimmered and changed, revealing the true nature of what I faced. The cabin's interior had transformed completely. What had been a simple, functional living space was now a cathedral of madness. Walls that curved inward at impossible angles, floors that shifted and rippled like water, ceilings that seemed to extend upward into infinite darkness. The familiar furniture remained but distorted, as if viewed through a funhouse mirror. And everywhere, on every surface, were the symbols I'd seen on the stones and in the lake, pulsing with a sickly blue light that seemed to draw sustenance from the very air. The center of the main room had become a pit, a perfect circle of absolute darkness that I instinctively knew led down to the lake and the doorways beneath. Around this pit stood 5 figures. They had once been human. Their forms still suggested humanity, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but everything else about them was wrong. Their limbs were too long, joints bending in extra places. Their skin was gray and mottled, stretched too tight in some places and hanging in loose folds in others. Their faces were the worst, featureless, except for 2 large eyes that reflected the blue light like an animal's and mouths that opened wider than physically possible. One of them stepped forward. Unlike the others, this one's form was more stable, more complete, as if it had spent more time in our reality and had better learned to mimic humanity. With a jolt of recognition, I realized it was wearing Daniel Martinez's face, the ranger who had fled before my arrival. "The Guardian returns," it said, using Martinez's voice. "You surprise us, human. The Skinwalker was our strongest, our most adapted to your world. Yet you defeated it." "What are you?" I asked, playing for time as I scanned the room for anything I could use. I needed to set fire to this place, but the bone knife and pistol in my hands wouldn't accomplish that. "We are the waiting ones," the thing wearing Martinez's face replied. "Those who dwelled in this reality before your kind rose to dominance. Those who were banished to the spaces between worlds by the first boundary makers. We have waited long for the bindings to weaken, for the doors to open once more." "Why here? Why this place?" "This location has always been thin, a natural weakness in the fabric between realities. Your ancestors recognized this. They built their stone circles and sacred sites to contain the thinness, to keep us out. Later, those who claimed to tame this land built structures over the thinnest points. First the survey cabins, then your ranger stations. Layers of boundaries, all serving the same purpose." As it spoke, the other entities moved around the pit, their movements synchronized, almost ritualistic. The blue light pulsed more rapidly, and I felt the floor tremble beneath my feet. "And now the final door opens," the Martinez thing continued. "We have weakened the physical boundaries. We have compromised the guardian. All that remains is the blood offering, freely given or forcibly taken." I noticed a kerosene lamp on a shelf behind the entities, the emergency backup I'd kept for power outages. If I could reach it, I might have a chance to burn this place down. But the creatures blocked my path, and the pit between us made direct approach impossible. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked, edging slowly along the wall, trying to circle around to the shelf. The creature smiled, Martinez's face stretching unnaturally with the expression. "Then we take what we need. But the crossing will be imperfect, painful for all involved. Give yourself willingly, and you may join us, exist beyond death, beyond limitation. Resist, and you will merely be consumed." The other entities had begun to sway, a low humming emanating from them that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. The blue symbols pulsed in time with their movements, and the darkness in the pit seemed to be rising, like water filling a well. "Why would I help you?" I demanded, still moving gradually toward the shelf. "You've killed others. You'll kill more if you cross over." "Kill?" The Martinez thing tilted its head curiously. "Such a limited understanding. We do not kill. We transform. We elevate. Your kind is bound by flesh, by time, by the rigid laws of your reality. We offer liberation from these constraints." "You offer monstrosity," I countered. "I've seen what you did to the deer, to Martinez." "Imperfect vessels," it conceded. "The animals cannot fully contain us, and Martinez, he fought too much, damaged the integration. But you who have sought understanding, who has faced the skinwalker and prevailed, you would make an excellent vessel." I was almost to the shelf now, but the creatures seemed aware of my movement. They adjusted their positions, still maintaining their circle around the pit but spreading out to block potential escape routes. "The rising begins regardless of your choice," the Martinez thing said, gesturing to the pit where darkness continued to well up like thick oil. "The boundary fails. The door opens. The only question is whether you cross with us willingly or perish in denial." The darkness from the pit had begun to spill over the edge, flowing across the floor like living shadow. Where it touched the wood, the material transformed, becoming something organic and pulsing. The cabin itself was being remade, converted into something that belonged to their reality rather than mine. I had to act now. In one fluid motion, I raised my pistol and fired, not at the creatures, but at the kerosene lamp on the shelf. The glass shattered, spraying fuel across the wall and floor. A stray spark ignited it, and flames leapt upward with unnatural speed. The entities shrieked in unison, a sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the transformed wood with even greater veracity than normal timber. The blue symbols flickered and faded wherever the flames touched them. "Fool!" the Martinez thing howled, its human disguise slipping to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. "You cannot destroy the crossing place. You only destroy yourself." It lunged at me, moving with impossible speed. I barely managed to duck aside, slashing with the bone knife as it passed. The blade connected, cutting a deep furrow across what had once been Martinez's chest. The wound didn't bleed. Instead, darkness poured out, the same oily substance that filled the pit. The creature screamed, more in rage than pain, and came at me again, This time I wasn't fast enough. Its elongated arms wrapped around me, pinning my own arms to my sides. The knife clattered to the floor, its face pressed close to mine, Martinez's features melting away entirely to reveal something I can't adequately describe. A writhing mass of features that seemed to shift and change with each moment, as if trying on different faces. "If we cannot have a willing vessel," it hissed, "we will take an unwilling one." Its mouth opened, wider and wider, unhinging like a snake's jaw. From within came not darkness, but a blinding blue light, the same color as the symbols. I felt my consciousness being pulled toward that light, my sense of self beginning to unravel. With my last coherent thought, I drove my head forward, smashing into the creature's face. It wasn't much, but the impact surprised it enough to loosen its grip. I tore free, diving for the bone knife. The fire had spread to most of the cabin now. The walls were burning away, revealing not the forest outside, but a swirling void filled with half-seen shapes and suggestions of landscapes that defied description. The boundary between realities was collapsing entirely. The other entities had abandoned their circle to attack me, moving with jerky, insect-like motions. I slashed at them with the knife, each cut causing them to recoil momentarily but doing no lasting damage. They were too numerous, too strong. I couldn't fight them all. The pit had overflowed completely, darkness spreading across what remained of the floor. Where it touched my boots, I felt a bone-deep cold that threatened to paralyze me. The Martinez thing watched from beyond the flames, its form shifting and changing as the fire consumed its human disguise. "The crossing cannot be stopped," it called. "Burn the cabin, burn yourself, it matters not. The boundary is broken. We are coming through." In that moment of desperation, I remembered the final pages of Hathorne's journal, the ones I hadn't fully understood until now. He had written of a last resort, a way to close the door when all other boundaries failed. The Guardian's blood, freely given, not to open, but to close. The circle must be completed in sacrifice. I understood now why the Skinwalker and these entities had tried so hard to corrupt me, to make me join them willingly. My blood, given freely to their cause, would fully open the door, but my blood, given freely to oppose them, might seal it instead. The pit was the key, the final doorway, the direct connection to whatever lay beyond. If I could close it somehow. There was only one way. With the entities closing in from all sides and the cabin burning around us, I made my choice. Clutching the bone knife, I ran toward the pit and leaped. As I fell into darkness, I heard the creatures shrieking in fury and fear. The sound followed me down into cold and silence. I don't know how long I fell. Time seemed meaningless in that place between realities. I glimpsed things no human was meant to see, vast architectures that defied physics, entities of such cosmic scale that my mind could only perceive fragments of their true form, histories and futures playing out simultaneously. Eventually, I landed, not with the impact I expected, but gently, as if the darkness itself had cushioned my fall. I found myself standing on what appeared to be the lake bottom, but impossibly dry and preserved, like a museum diorama of what had once been underwater. Before me stood the doorways I'd seen while diving, those black stone arches with their membrane coverings. But from this side I could see through the membranes into my own reality, distorted and wavering, like looking up from underwater at the world above. The largest doorway pulsed with blue light, its membrane thinning to near transparency. Through it I could see the burning cabin, now almost completely consumed by flames. The entities moved around it in a frenzy, reaching toward the doorway as if trying to pull it wider. I knew what I had to do. Using the bone knife, I cut my palm deeply, letting blood flow freely. As the first drops hit the strange ground beneath me, reality itself seemed to shudder. I pressed my bleeding hand against the membrane of the central doorway. "I close the way," I said, using words that came to me from some ancestral memory, some knowledge buried deep in human consciousness. "I am the Guardian, and I seal this boundary with my life." My blood spread across the membrane, not dripping through but being absorbed into it. The blue light flickered and dimmed. The entities on the other side howled in fury as they realized what was happening. The membrane began to thicken, becoming opaque once more. The doorway shrank, its frame contracting. All around me, the other doorways were doing the same, closing, sealing, rejecting the entities that clawed desperately to get through. As the last opening shrank to nothing, I felt a profound shifting, not just of the space around me, but of reality itself. Whatever place I occupied was collapsing, folding in on itself like origami being compressed. I closed my eyes, prepared for oblivion. Instead, I felt water. I was floating, suspended in the cold depths of the lake. Above me, sunlight filtered down in wavering beams. My lungs burned for air, but I felt strangely peaceful. I had succeeded. The boundary was restored. The door was closed. With the last of my strength, I kicked toward the surface, toward light and air and the world I had saved. I broke through into morning sunlight, gasping, my body remembering its need for oxygen. The lake was just a lake again. Clear, natural, ordinary. On the shore where the cabin had stood was nothing but charred earth and a few stone foundations. I dragged myself onto the pebbly beach and collapsed, exhausted beyond measure. Above me, the sky was perfectly blue, without a single cloud. Birds sang in the forest. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. The world continued, unaware of how close it had come to unraveling. Days later, a Forest Service search team found me. They had been dispatched when my radio check-ins stopped, and satellite imagery showed a fire at the outpost. They asked what had happened. I told them there had been an electrical fire, that I'd barely escaped. I said nothing of skinwalkers or entities or doorways between worlds. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. In the months since, I've recovered physically, though the nightmares persist. I requested transfer to a different district, away from mountains and lakes. I work in the desert now, where the boundaries between worlds seem thicker, more stable. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see those symbols glowing blue in darkness. I can still hear those voices calling from just beyond perception, and I wonder if the boundary I helped restore will hold forever, or if someday another ranger will find themselves facing what waits beyond the thin places of our world. For now, I keep watch. I remain vigilant. And when I hear coyotes howling at night, I listen carefully to make sure the sound is entirely animal, because I know the truth that most will never learn. The monsters from our oldest stories are real. They have always been real. And the only thing keeping them from our world are boundaries both physical and metaphysical. Boundaries that require guardians. Boundaries that can fail. So, if you find yourself in remote wilderness, far from civilization, and you see tracks that change form mid-stride, or hear your name called by a voice that sounds almost familiar, or discover strange symbols carved into ancient stones, turn back. Return to populated areas, to electric lights and human voices and the comforting illusion of safety. For in the deep woods, in the high mountains, in the still waters of isolated lakes, the boundary grows thin, and what waits beyond has infinite patience. It has been waiting since before humanity first walked upright. It can wait a while longer, but it is always watching, always listening, always hungry for our world. The radio crackled to life, static cutting through the early morning quiet of my ranger station. Ranger dispatch to Nahimana East Post. We've got reports of hikers missing near Blackwater Lake. 3 days overdue at checkpoint. Last ping from their satellite phone places them 4 miles northwest of your position. Over. I grabbed the receiver, already calculating the supplies I'd need. East Post copy. I'll head out immediately. Any details on the hikers? Over. Group of 3, all experienced. Weather turned bad up there, might have sought shelter. Park director wants you on this ASAP. Storm's cleared enough for search operations. Over. Copy that. I'll radio when I'm on site. Over and out. I'd been stationed at Nahimana Wilderness Area for 6 years now. The name came from Algonquin, meaning mystic or supernatural, which felt appropriate for these ancient forests that stretched across miles of protected land. Most visitors stuck to the designated trails, enjoyed their weekend commune with nature, then returned to civilization with nothing more than some mosquito bites and photos for social media. Some, however, ventured deeper. Those were the ones I usually ended up looking for. I loaded my pack methodically. First aid kit, emergency rations, extra batteries, thermal blankets, water purification tablets, flares. My rifle went into its weatherproof case. Not for the hikers, but for the wildlife. At least, that's what I told myself as I checked the ammunition. The weight of the gun had always been reassuring, but lately I'd caught myself reaching for it more often, even when alone in my cabin. The growing unease had started 3 months ago. Something felt different about the forest. Rangers develop a sixth sense about their territory, and mine was screaming that something had changed. Wildlife patterns had shifted. Deer were avoiding certain areas they'd previously frequented. Bear sightings had dropped dramatically. Even the birds seemed to go quiet in parts of the forest where they'd once been vocal. Park management dismissed my concerns. Seasonal variations, they said. Natural migration patterns. But I knew better. I'd grown up with my grandmother's stories about these woods. She was half Algonquin and spoke of the forest with reverence and fear. The trees remember, she'd say. They've seen what walks between them when no one's watching. As I locked up the station and headed toward my truck, I glanced at the tree line. The morning mist still clung to the forest floor, creating ghostly shapes between the ancient trunks. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, too tall to be a deer, too fluid to be a bear. I blinked, and it was gone. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes on service roads that hadn't been maintained since the spring. I parked, checked my GPS, and loaded the coordinates for the hikers' last known position. 4 miles northwest would put them near the old logging camp that had been abandoned in the 80s. There was a cabin there. Perhaps they'd sought shelter. The forest welcomed me with its familiar symphony. Wind through pine needles, distant woodpeckers, the occasional rustle of undergrowth. But as I moved deeper, following game trails and cutting through dense sections of woodland, the sounds gradually diminished until I was walking in near silence. 2 hours in, I reached a small clearing and paused to check my bearings. That's when I noticed the crows, at least 30 of them perched in the surrounding trees, completely still and silent. All facing the same direction, all watching me. Not a single caw between them. I'd seen crows gather before, but never like this. Never so deliberate. I picked up my pace, uncomfortable under their collective gaze. The coordinates led me to the edge of Blackwater Lake, named for its unusual depth and the dark, almost opaque quality of its water. The abandoned logging cabin sat on a rise about 50 yards from the shore, weathered but still standing. As I approached, I saw fresh boot prints in the mud. Someone had been here recently. "Hello, park ranger? Anyone here?" I called out, my voice seeming to disappear into the dense air. No response. The cabin door was ajar. I drew my flashlight and pushed it open slowly, the hinges protesting with a long, agonized creak. The interior was a single room, with a stone fireplace, a few broken chairs, and a wooden table. A thin layer of dust covered everything, except for a clear space on the table where something had recently been placed. Next to it lay a small leather-bound journal. I picked it up, flipping to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. Day 3 at cabin. Aaron still missing. Jess thinks we should leave, but I know it's watching the trails. It mimicked Aaron's voice again last night, called my name from the trees for hours. Something scratched at the walls, not animal claws. Too deliberate, too rhythmic. When dawn came, I found symbols carved into the door. Native, maybe? Don't know what they mean, but they weren't there yesterday. The thing by the lake wasn't human. The way it moved. The way it watches. I'm writing this down because I don't think we're getting out. If anyone finds this, the entry ended abruptly. A sudden chill ran through the cabin despite the summer heat outside. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the walls. That's when I saw them. Dozens of symbols carved into the wood. Crude pictographs that resembled stick figures with elongated limbs and animal heads. They definitely weren't there when I entered. My hand went to my radio, but all I got was static. I tried my satellite phone. No signal. I was about to check my GPS when a sound from outside froze me in place. Someone was calling my name. "Hello?" I called back, moving cautiously to the door. The voice came again, closer now, more distinct. It was using my name, but something was wrong with its pronunciation. Each syllable stretched a beat too long, as if being tested on an unfamiliar tongue. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except the gentle ripple of water on the lake shore. Then I saw it. A reflection in the dark water. A figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the porch was empty. When I looked back at the lake, the reflection remained, staring up at me from beneath the water's surface, smiling. Night falls quickly in Nahimana, especially near the lake where the tall pines block the last rays of sunlight. I had a decision to make: continue searching and risk being caught in the dark, or secure the cabin for the night and resume at dawn. The journal entries and those inexplicable carvings made the choice for me. Something was wrong here, and blundering through the forest after nightfall wouldn't help the missing hikers, or me. I dragged the broken furniture against the door and windows, creating makeshift barricades. The symbols carved into the walls seemed to watch me as I worked, their crude forms taking on an almost animated quality in the beam of my flashlight. With the cabin secured, I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static, though something about the white noise felt intentional. I could almost make out words buried in the hiss. I shut it off quickly. The temperature dropped as darkness settled completely. I hesitated to start a fire. Smoke would signal my position, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be found by whatever was out there. Instead, I wrapped myself in my emergency blanket and kept my rifle across my lap, watching the windows for any movement. 2 hours passed in tense silence. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. Too heavy for a person, with an odd cadence, as if whatever walked out there had too many legs, or legs that bent in the wrong directions. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Something sniffed loudly, like an animal catching a scent. Then came 3 sharp knocks. My grip tightened on the rifle as I remained perfectly still, barely breathing. 3 more knocks, followed by a voice. A woman's voice, painfully familiar. "Let me in," it said, using my grandmother's exact tone and accent. "I'm cold out here." My grandmother had been dead for 12 years. "Let me in," the voice repeated, shifting in pitch, becoming younger, more urgent. "Please help me. I'm one of the hikers. It's after me." I didn't respond, couldn't respond. Fear had paralyzed my vocal cords. "I know you're in there, Ranger." The voice changed again, this time to a child's high-pitched plea. "Why won't you help me? Don't you want to save me?" The manipulations would have been almost laughable if they weren't so perfectly executed. Each voice carried the exact emotional resonance needed to trigger compassion, to make me want to open the door. The knocking became pounding, the whole cabin shaking with the force of it. The barricaded furniture began to rattle against the door. "Open the door!" The voice was no longer human, a guttural, multi-layered sound that resonated through my bones. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. I remained frozen, rifle aimed at the door, for what felt like hours. Dawn was still far off, and the darkness outside the windows was absolute. A soft, scraping sound drew my attention to the ceiling. Something was on the roof. I could hear its claws, or fingernails, dragging slowly across the wooden shingles, back and forth, methodical, searching. Through a crack in the roof, a fine stream of dirt began to pour down, landing on the floor in a perfect circle. More dirt followed, but instead of forming a pile, it began to arrange itself into patterns, the same symbols that were carved into the walls. I watched, horrified, as an unseen force shaped the dirt into increasingly complex formations. The symbols began to move, rotating slowly at first, then faster, the entire pattern spinning like a primitive zoetrope. In the center, a shape began to rise, dirt forming into a miniature human figure that stood upright. It turned its tiny head toward me and took a step forward. I fired a shot through the roof. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The dirt figure collapsed instantly, and I heard something large scrabbling away across the shingles. Heart pounding, ears ringing, I reloaded and waited. Nothing returned to the roof, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only angered whatever was out there. The rest of the night passed in a state of hypervigilance. Every sound, every shift of the cabin settling, every gust of wind sent adrenaline coursing through my body. I didn't dare close my eyes. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the windows, I noticed something I'd missed in the darkness. On the floor near the table where I'd found the journal, the wooden planks had been pried up, revealing dark soil beneath. Something had been buried there. Cautiously, I moved toward it, sweeping my flashlight into the shallow hole. A small leather pouch sat nestled in the dirt. I hesitated before picking it up, my grandmother's warnings about disturbing unknown objects echoing in my mind. But I needed answers. I carefully lifted the pouch and untied its drawstring. Inside was a collection of small bones, too small to be human, arranged around a yellowed piece of paper folded into a tight square. I unfolded it carefully. It was a map of Nahimana, far older than any Park Service map I'd seen. Certain areas were marked with the same symbols from the walls, and a location deep in the forest was circled repeatedly in what looked like dried blood. The circled location was labeled in faded ink. The Threshold. I knew the area, a strange rock formation that formed a natural arch. Local tribes had historically avoided it, according to the cultural preservation officer who occasionally consulted for the park. He'd never explained why it was considered taboo, only that it wasn't a place where people were meant to linger. As I studied the map, I noticed small handwritten notes along the margins. Most were faded beyond recognition, but one was still legible. It wears them after it takes them. A sound outside snapped my attention back to the present, branches breaking under heavy weight. I moved to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. A figure stood at the edge of the lake, its back to me. It appeared to be a man, dressed in hiking gear, staring out at the water. One of the missing hikers. I was about to call out when the figure began to change. It started subtly, shoulders widening beyond natural proportions, arms lengthening until fingertips brushed the ground. Then its head rotated, not turning, but rotating completely backward while its body remained facing the lake. Its face was wrong, features too symmetrical, skin too smooth, like a doll's approximation of a human face. It smiled with too many teeth. It knew I was watching. The thing that wasn't a man began walking backward toward the cabin, its head still twisted around, eyes locked on my position, limbs moving with jerky, marionette-like motions. I grabbed my pack and the journal, shoving the map and the pouch inside. There was no time to radio for backup, even if the radio had been working. I needed to get out now. The rear window had no glass, just wooden shutters nailed shut years ago. I pried them open with my knife, creating an opening barely wide enough to squeeze through. As I climbed out, I heard the cabin door splinter. I dropped to the ground and ran, not daring to look back. The forest that had been my sanctuary for years now felt alien and hostile. I knew these woods better than anyone, but for the first time I felt like an intruder. The trees seemed to close in behind me, branches reaching like fingers to slow my escape. I had only one clear direction, toward the threshold marked on the map. Not because I wanted to go there, but because instinct told me that's where I'd find the missing hikers, if any of them were still alive. The forest grew denser as I pushed deeper into Nahimana's uncharted regions. No maintained trails existed here, just game paths and the occasional break in the undergrowth. My GPS had stopped functioning hours ago, the screen frozen on coordinates that made no sense, numbers that kept changing whenever I looked away. I navigated using the old map and my knowledge of the terrain, constantly checking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never subsided. It intensified with every mile. The journal I'd found became my guide. I'd been reading its earlier entries as I hiked, piecing together what had happened to the 3 missing people. They'd come to Nahimana looking for something specific. The author, who signed his entries as Michael, mentioned research into local legends about skinwalkers. His companion Aaron was apparently a cryptozoologist, while Jessica was an anthropology student specializing in Native American folklore. They hadn't been ordinary hikers, they were hunters of myths. And something had found them first. Michael's entries grew increasingly paranoid after their 3rd day in the wilderness. He described Aaron wandering off to investigate strange noises, then returning hours later, not quite right. Jessica noticed it too, subtle differences in Aaron's mannerisms, the way he moved, how he would stand motionless for hours watching them while they slept. The night before their planned return, Aaron disappeared again. When he came back, Jessica screamed and ran. Michael never saw her again. The thing wearing Aaron's shape pursued Michael to the cabin, where he barricaded himself inside and began carving protective symbols he'd found in Jessica's research notes. The final pages contained frantic descriptions of the entity mimicking both Aaron's and Jessica's voices, calling to him from the darkness. The last coherent sentence chilled me. It doesn't just want our bodies, it wants our memories, our identities. It's learning how to be us. I closed the journal, disturbed by its implications. If what Michael wrote was true, then whatever had taken the hikers could perfectly mimic its victims, appearance, voice, mannerisms. It could be anyone, even me. The thought lodged in my mind like a splinter. How would I know if I was still myself? What if that thing at the cabin had somehow affected me? I examined my hands, my skin, looking for any sign that I was changing. Nothing seemed different, but would I even notice? A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, rifle raised, but saw only trees. The sound came again, closer, accompanied by a low whisper that seemed to emanate from multiple directions at once. "Ranger!" I fired a warning shot into the air. The forest fell silent for several heartbeats, then erupted with the sound of 1,000 wings as birds took flight simultaneously from every surrounding tree. The sky darkened with their mass exodus, and in that moment of distraction, I heard rushed movement through the underbrush, circling me, closing in. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the forest, abandoning stealth for speed. The map showed a river ahead. If I could reach it, cross it, perhaps whatever was pursuing me would be deterred. I burst through the tree line and found myself at the riverbank. But what lay before me wasn't the gentle flow indicated on the map. The water raged, swollen from recent rains, churning white against jagged rocks. The pursuing sounds grew closer. I had no choice. I waded in, the current immediately pulling at my legs. By midstream, the water reached my chest, each step a battle against the force trying to sweep me downstream. My foot slipped on a mossy rock, and for a terrifying moment, I went under. Cold darkness enveloping me. Something brushed against my leg underwater, not a fish or branch, but fingers, grabbing, pulling. I kicked violently and surfaced, gasping for air, fighting my way to the opposite bank with desperate strokes. As I dragged myself onto shore, I looked back across the river. Figures stood among the trees on the bank I'd fled, indistinct shapes that seemed to shift between human and animal forms. They made no attempt to cross, but simply watched, their stillness more threatening than any pursuit. I didn't linger to study them. The map showed the threshold was less than a mile ahead, and the sun was already beginning its descent. I needed to reach it before nightfall. The terrain changed as I approached, the ground becoming rocky, vegetation sparse. An unnatural quiet hung in the air, as if this part of the forest existed in its own vacuum of sound. And then I saw it. The stone arch rising from a clearing formed by two massive boulders that had somehow come to rest against each other. Natural, yet too perfect in its formation to be entirely explained by geology. The threshold. Around its base, smaller stones had been arranged in concentric circles, clearly placed by human hands. Ancient hands, judging by the lichen covering them. As I approached, I noticed dark stains on the stones forming the arch. Some looked centuries old, others disturbingly fresh. The ground within the circles was bare earth, no grass, no insects, nothing living. And at the center, directly beneath the arch, was a depression in the soil approximately the size and shape of a human body. Nearby, I found evidence of the missing hikers, a backpack torn to shreds, a broken camera, a boot with the laces still tied. Blood spattered the stones around the arch, leading toward the center depression like a macabre pathway. I checked my watch. Less than an hour of daylight remained. I needed to make a decision: retreat to safer ground or investigate further. Professional obligation warred with self-preservation. The sound of movement from the arch made the decision for me. A hand, human but impossibly elongated, reached up from the depression in the earth. I raised my rifle as a figure pulled itself out of the ground like a swimmer emerging from water. Dirt cascaded from its form as it stood. It wore a park ranger uniform. My face. But wrong, like a reflection in troubled water, features rippling and settling into approximate locations. It spoke with my voice, but with a subtle echo, as if multiple throats were producing the sound simultaneously. "We've been waiting for you," it said, head tilting at an impossible angle. "You're the last one." "The last what?" I managed to ask, rifle steady despite my terror. "The last piece," it replied. "We need what you know, what you remember, what you are." It took a step forward, its movements fluid yet somehow disjointed, like a puppet with too many strings. The others gave themselves to us. The forest accepts their offerings. The man who chases legends, the woman who studies old stories, and now the guardian who knows the paths. Understanding dawned horribly. The missing hikers hadn't been random victims. They'd been selected, just as I had been, for our knowledge, our roles, our connection to this place. "Where are they?" I demanded. The thing wearing my face smiled too widely. "Everywhere. Nowhere. They are the forest now, as you will be." It lunged with impossible speed. I fired, the bullet tearing through its chest, but it kept coming, the wound closing almost instantly. I emptied the magazine, each shot finding its mark, each mark healing before my eyes. The creature didn't slow. As it reached for me, its fingers lengthening into claws, I made the only choice left. I ran toward the arch. The thing screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, and gave chase. I felt its breath on my neck as I dove through the stone threshold. The world inverted. I was falling through darkness, then standing in the clearing again. But everything was wrong. The colors too vivid, shadows too deep, the very air thick like water in my lungs. And I was not alone. They surrounded me, dozens of figures, some recognizably human, others twisted into forms that defied description. Among them, I spotted faces that matched the missing hikers' photos from the report: Michael, Aaron, Jessica. They reached for me with hands that passed through my flesh like smoke, their voices a cacophony of pleas and warnings. Behind them stood something else, something ancient that wore the forest like a cloak, its true form hidden beneath layers of stolen skins and borrowed faces. I glimpsed antlers, too many eyes, a mouth that opened into darkness. It spoke directly into my mind. "We have existed here since before your kind named the stars. We were the shadows between trees that your ancestors feared. We are hunger that wears the face of the consumed." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. "To become, to endure, to remember through your memories. You will join the others. Your knowledge will preserve us." The figures moved closer, their spectral forms beginning to merge with mine. I felt cold seeping into my bones, my thoughts becoming sluggish. In desperation, I reached for the leather pouch I'd taken from the cabin, the bones, and the map. The entity recoiled as I held it up. "Those are not yours to hold," it hissed. "They were payment, protection." Understanding flashed through my fading consciousness. The pouch wasn't a record or a trophy, it was a ward. Someone had buried it in the cabin as protection against this thing. With my remaining strength, I tore the map to pieces and scattered the bones at my feet, forming a circle around me. The entity shrieked, the sound shattering reality itself. The world fractured around me like broken glass, and I was falling again. I woke on the forest floor, the stone arch looming above me in the last light of day. Blood trickled from my nose and ears, but I was alive, myself. The clearing was empty, no sign of the creature, the spectral figures, or the missing hikers. But I knew they were still there, just beyond the veil of perception. Trapped. Watching. I stumbled back toward park boundaries, navigating by stars alone. It took 2 days to reach the ranger station. Search parties had been looking for me. I'd been missing for over a week, though to me it had felt like less than 48 hours. I reported finding signs of the missing hikers, but no survivors. I mentioned the cabin, the journal, but nothing about what I'd seen at the threshold. They wouldn't have believed me. That was 3 months ago. I requested transfer to another park, but while I wait for the paperwork, I still patrol Nahimana. The boundaries between worlds seem thinner now. I catch glimpses of things moving just at the edge of vision. Hear voices in the static of my radio. Sometimes I find myself standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees for hours without remembering how I got there. My reflection doesn't always move when I do, and at night, when the moon is dark, I hear scratching at my window. Something that wears my face is trying to get in. It's patient. It can wait. After all, the forest remembers. And now, so do I.